The story begins with a girl who always dreamed of being a villain, rather than the protagonist of a novel. And even if someone doesn't like it, she's still a villain born into a wealthy family. Most of all, she would not want a life where she would tolerate unpleasant and toxic people, who will tell her the right way to do something or point out any mistakes, and in which she would have died because of an accident caused by another human being. And unsurprisingly, most likely no one even missed her after that, or even noticed she was gone. When she woke up in a new body, in a new room, and surrounded by other people, from that moment on, she had a new life. Girl even had her own assistant, who, as soon as she saw her mistress awake, offered breakfast to the all the food was insanely appetizing, like being in a real princess palace. Thus she began to live the life she dreamed of. All happened from the moment she was reincarnated in the body of the rich villain of the novel. That day she couldn't believe she was the girl she dreamed of becoming all her life. But it hadn't turned out quite the way she'd imagined. Fantasy novel Cordelia's Light, Lady Yvonne, a cruel and immoral villainess. Upon learning of the engagement of her beloved Adrian with the novel's protagonist Cordelia, she made a contract with the devil and gained the power of darkness. Magician Yvonne became even stronger through demonic power. She turned into a great dark mage and tormented the main characters, eventually met her end, and died tragically. Yvonne decided that she wasn't going to let that ending happen. It was going to be the way she wanted it to be. Girl who had read the novel, of all the villains, she was most jealous of Yvonne, whom she had turned into her family owned an orichalcum mine and several gemstone mines. They had their own trading company, selling the best magic items in the empire, and her father was the owner of a magic tower, because in the long history of the family, there were many magicians in the lineage. Yvonne had such a lovely figure that her assistant always admired her abs and perfect body, even though the girl didn't do much exercise. In addition to her unique beauty, she was also quite good at magic. Sometimes it happened that a girl would admire herself and repeat to herself that she was perfection itself. In her previous life, she was an orphan, lived in a slum, and worked hard at night without end. Compared to her old life, her new life seems like a fairy tale. From here on out, her job is to be happy for the two main characters and their happy ending. She thought about the fact that it was only worth bypassing this problem in the form of the main characters, and there was no way Yvonne was going to become a dark mage. When suddenly her assistant comes in and tells her that Yvonne has a duke to see her, which she didn't expect. The girl got up abruptly from the bed and saw that he had already come, and after that he immediately said that he had given her a probationary period, and asked if she had not repented in the slightest, and that she was up to something again. It was Kaiser Argentros, head of the family and master of the magic tower. Before she got into Yvonne's body, she did something terrible. She planted one thing in the place where the main characters had their date, but luckily there were no fatalities after that. And now the girl will have to take responsibility for what she didn't do, because she reincarnated into this body after the incident. Unfortunately, once she was here, she received a punishment for it, which was that she must sit in her room and not come out of it. She could eat whatever she wanted and lie on her bed whenever she wanted to. This kind of punishment she really liked, except she wondered what Kaiser didn't like. Maybe she ate too much or rested, haha. But still, so as not to seem insolent, the girl apologized and said she would think about her action and behavior, so that it would not be like her at all. When suddenly the man called his assistant, and the girl was very frightened, for she thought she might be thrown out for misbehavior. But it turns out he just asked her for an assignment with some paperwork, to which the assistant suggested that it might be too difficult for Yvonne, because there were too many documents for a first assignment. At that moment, she wondered if she'd have to work all day here too. And then, as if the man had read her mind, and said that from today, she would work 6 hours every day. But after her past 6 hours, it was too easy for her. After all, she used to have to work 30 hours and the work was much harder. So she took the punishment as an easy job. But this time, the man's words were more convincing. He said that if she ran away this time, he would take her out of the family tree. Even that didn't upset her too much, even though harmony was incomplete. But still, the girl was glad to have a family. The first day she came into the world, her father called her crazy. She even thought he hated her. Still, she realized that either way it was better than if she was living her past life right now. Meanwhile, some guy was in the office and he was looking at the paperwork. Then he was approached by what appeared to be his assistant, who asked if he was reading those documents again. to which he replied that they were just in his desk drawer, and he decided to look at them. Afterward, the aide said that the studio, by the absence of news for 18 years, it had long since forgotten everything there. But the lad replied that his father was worried to the end that he had not been able to repay that debt. The aide said they would write to him themselves if they needed to, so don't think too much about it. And yet they came to the conclusion that there was no point in worrying about something that hadn't even happened yet. They were hoping to be contacted soon. The lad tried to believe it after all, for the assistant had convinced him that he had a premonition that never deceived him. Meanwhile, Kaiser, the head of the household, saw Yvonne's work and couldn't believe how she'd handled it. It turns out that the girl had suggested a good idea, and his assistant suggested that in this way, it would be possible to estimate the monthly sales of the company at once, to which the man replied that he simply could not believe it, because the square table method of organization is a real reform that Yvonne came up with. Her father couldn't even think the girl was capable of that, to which the assistant replied that Yvonne had always been very intelligent, something many people didn't notice, and even her own father, who was always sure she wasn't as smart a girl as he'd like her to be, and it turns out he'd been doubting her all her life. He then asked for her personal assistant to be called into his office. When she arrived, the first thing she did was to greet the gentleman and ask how she could help him, to which he replied that he would like to ask one question: if she had noticed anything strange in Yvonne's behavior lately, for she was very often around her, and surely her had managed to notice something. To which she replied that she wanted to talk to him about it too, because she noticed that after he gave her daughter a punishment, she became very upset, which her father could not have expected, and was surprised, because she had not reacted before when he yelled at her or punished her. Afterward, the girl told me that Yvonne had started eating less, about half the usual amount, although she used to eat 6 meals a day since she was a child. Also, the girl had heard from the other assistants that Yvonne had cleaned up the desk in the office. The man was sure that there must be some reason for all this, for his daughter could not have changed so drastically in a few days, to which the assistant suggested that it was probably because of the prince. His rejection must have shocked Yvonne, to which the girl's father replied that he didn't even know that, and probably didn't need to punish her then, because it was hard enough as it was, and maybe she still couldn't get over the prince. And then there was her father's constant punishment, for which he was a little ashamed of her. But unlike him, the girl felt just fine, for the job he had devised for her was the easiest thing she had ever done. Yvonne never thought her skills in a computer program could come in handy here. Meanwhile, the assistant tried to tell the girl's father that Yvonne may not show her sadness or feeling bad, but she still seems upset about the prince. But in fact, the girl is not sad at all now. On the contrary, she is happy with every moment of her new life. But so far her father doesn't notice it and thinks she's very upset. The next day, he began to think about the fact that Prince Adrian didn't even look in his daughter's direction, because she was so much in love with him. Yvonne is a very kind, incredibly beautiful girl, who at the same time has magical abilities. In addition, is the eldest daughter of the Argentros family. It was unclear to him what the prince lacked. He had a suspicion that it was as if the prince was purposely being so demonstrative and going out with other girls. It was still unknown to the girl's father what the prince didn't like about his daughter. After a little while, the girl came into her father's office and thought he'd called her in to complain about her poorly done job. Before he started criticizing her yet, Yvonne made sure to explain that she had really tried, and if anything was wrong, she was ready to apologize. To which her father replied that that's not the point. Her work is really done amazingly, so she doesn't need to worry about it, which was a great pleasure to her, for she had seldom heard anything like that from her father. He then noticed that Yvonne looked very pleased today, and wondered if something good had happened, to which she replied that she just didn't think he would praise her today, as it had never happened before. And it is not surprising, because before, she behaved much worse, for which she apologized, which very much once again surprised her father. She had never apologized for anything before, and on top of that she said she regretted her behavior all those years ago. Afterwards, the girl saw that her father was very much surprised that she had apologized for something for the first time in her life. He just couldn't believe it, and he thought it wasn't his daughter, but some other girl. There came a point where he wanted to support his daughter after the prince situation. He said he bought a new house so she could break things there to let go of her feelings of anger. Yvonne didn't quite know what he was talking about, as she had never heard him say that before. To make it clearer to her, The aide explained that the Duke had set up a shield near the house, so she could do whatever she wanted there, and everything would remain intact. Afterwards, she said it was not necessary at all, for she had dreamed of her own house all her life, and it was not at all necessary to destroy it. When suddenly she notices the suspiciously satisfied look on her father's face. So she said she didn't want to destroy any house. She felt fine without it. After these words, for some reason, he started to get angry with the prince. He thought that because of him, his daughter had changed so much, and this was very unusual for him. Even though his daughter's behavior had changed for the better, he still felt bad that because of some prince, his daughter might be sad, even though she really wasn't. He tried not to show all that emotion, but he couldn't, except that he really had nothing to worry about, because his daughter was doing fine. Because of her assistant, he's now convinced that his daughter is sad about it, which he's very wrong about. But at the same time, the girl was also surprised that this man could be so kind. She had a different opinion of him before. The only thing you'd hear from him was her mistakes or stupid antics. Whatever she did, he'd find a reason to punish her. And that's when the girl realized that maybe he was softer in character than he looked. It was time he wanted to solve her problem, and told her that if she wanted something, she could tell him about it. And if it was a romantic relationship, there are plenty of decent men besides a prince. And she had something to say, and he was looking forward to her asking him for something. The girl said, since she had not had this opportunity before, she would like to study. With this word, she shocked her father once again. And learning and Ivan used to be two different concepts and never crossed paths. And of course no one could refuse her. Everyone was delighted with her unusual wish. After reincarnation, she didn't know much about this life, and she would like to learn everything. Surprisingly, she was very happy that she could concentrate only on her studies and no one would distract her. She had an assumption that if her father was a mage, then she could control magic like he could. When suddenly something seemed very strange to her. For some reason she can't master magic books in any way. Though there is no problem with reading, the girl suspects it's because she's not the real Ivan. After that, she started thinking that maybe she didn't need magic at the moment. But still, she was curious to try it, and she was hoping for some kind of miracle. To make things much more realistic, she remembered what real mages usually shouted out. It was to better believe it could work out, but at that moment, things didn't quite go the way she'd imagined, because someone walked in on her. When this man saw how strange Ivan was acting at that moment, he asked what was going on. It looked a little ridiculous, and her brother Barden, who already thought her crazy and insane, saw it all. Turns out he came for a reason. He needed to ask her something. It concerned the documents she was working with. He asked if she was the one who put the sales in order and made the spreadsheets, to which she replied that she was the one who had. He then inquired why she suddenly wanted to study something. Was it really for some title? This question did not please her very much, for she was not studying any subject for that purpose, but only because of personal interest. So it was a bit disheartening to hear such assumptions. Once again she was tried to be blamed later, which is not true. So she explained that she was just trying to help the whole family, which surprised Barden a lot. Ivan began to tell him, monsters used to appear once every 10 years, but now that time frame was getting shorter and shorter, and he should realize it. It's clear that the next battle will be even bigger, and will probably be 3 years from now, to which he asked why she suddenly came to that conclusion. The girl replied that she had been studying history all day today, so she had reason to assume it. Plus, she was able to figure it out on her own and compile the data into a table. She then asked him if he realized she wasn't doing it for the title, but for a more important purpose. And yet he wondered why she had decided to help them. It wasn't like her to do so. To which she replied that the reason is very simple and obvious. She just wants to help, and after that we can enjoy a quiet life. When she explained the real reason, asked if her little brother understood, after saying that, he didn't even know how to react, and asked what she had just called him. Ivan repeated it, though she knew perfectly well that it was unusual for him to hear it from her. Then he concluded that she was as crazy as he thought she was. After this conversation, he, like his father, began to blame the prince, for because of him they thought Ivan had changed so much, and even came to see him to talk about it. He feels like it can't be left alone. To which the man replied that he was very glad that he wasn't the only one who noticed it, because it was really very serious indeed. They started telling each other that she called someone awesome and someone else a brother. It was really weird. As a result, they concluded that the prince's refusal was a big blow for Ivan, after which he even changed his character and attitude to people. Barden told his father that Ivan was eager to start living a quiet life, which is what she had told him a few minutes ago, and the father replied that even the teachers who came to see the girl today praised her, and said that Ivan was very capable and quick to memorize information. The girl's father and brother mistakenly thought that all these changes were due to the prince, but they didn't know that there was a different girl in the real Ivan's body altogether, and that's where her changes in character, ability, and attitude come in. They were eager to introduce her to a man that even a prince couldn't match. Her father was sure that after dating a good man, her condition would definitely improve, and she would forget that prince forever. Barden agreed with this, for it was better than sitting at home and being sad all the time. Ivan was still young enough in their opinion, but they decided to let her go out on a date. Afterwards, the girl's brother asked if there were already any candidates with whom Ivan would be happy and forget all the problems, because it would be nice to have the right person to make a girl feel better about herself. And apparently the girl's father knew such a man, so he sent him a letter. It turned out to be the same guy who was looking at documents in his office recently. He got a letter from Kaiser, the girl's father, so he has an excuse to go to the capital. He doesn't seem to mind the offer. 18 years ago, the previous Duke of Yales was a rather straightforward and opinionated man. He took part in the fight against the monsters, trusting only his experience. However, during the battle he was trapped in the flames. At the time, the Kaiser was passing by on his way north to get medicine for his wife. The great magician Kaiser helped the Duke in that dangerous situation, and thus the Yales family owed a great debt to Argentros. The proud father was on the one hand grateful for the rescue, but asked not to divulge the fact that the mage had helped him out of danger. In return, he promised to fulfill any request of the Kaiser. At present, thanks to one letter, a forgotten promise has come to light again. It turns out that in this letter, the girl's father didn't just write his request. He explained the reason why he needed it, so that the Duke would know exactly what was required of him. Duke's aide asked him several times if he was sure he wanted to help this family. He said that the Duke was under no obligation because of some help in the past to date that man's daughter. But the Duke ignored him and asked him to prepare a new suit for him and gifts for the girl. Even though his assistant tried to talk him out of it, it was important to him, as a real man, to help a girl who needed support. Moreover, he owed her father a debt, and besides, even without it, he would not have denied it to the woman. After that, the aide realized he couldn't beat his stubbornness, so he set off to do his bidding. After the aide left, the Duke was insanely curious to know something: how terrible a person the Duke's daughter is, for there are many rumors about her that she's a real villain. When she'd look at someone, those people would always want to leave afterwards. They'd be so scared after one look at her. It was unusual for her to feel that the sight of her made people so afraid of her. Her brother saw something good in it, and explained that it meant her reputation was still strong. After some time, they finally arrived at their destination. It was a very beautiful place, that I wanted to look at all the time, to savor this beauty and take my time. It's been a long time since the girl has been here, so she's forgotten how beautiful this place is. And since Yvonne has another girl in her body now, she has to pretend like she remembers something. It's the exact spot where the real villain threw an object that could threaten the people who were there. For some reason, her brother insisted that she repeat the act, to somehow see the mean sister he'd grown accustomed to. But for now, she wasn't really paying attention to his words and comments, because she was busy looking at the beauty around her. It was the Imperial Palace, which was far more beautiful than she had imagined it to be. But for some reason, at that moment, her brother, for some reason, asked her not to look there. And her father was of the same opinion. Yvonne didn't understand why they were doing it. Afterward, Barden asked her if she still regretted it or not, to which she asked why she had to regret anything. And that's when she realized that those two definitely thought she was still in love with the prince. So she decided to ask for their attention to explain that it wasn't true, but they ignored her and thought it wasn't true. Meanwhile, they had already arrived at the best atelier in the empire, whereupon they were greeted by the staff and told that they had not seen each other for a long time. All these people, strangely enough, were also surprised that the girl had changed very much, at least in character. She used to always come alone and all the workers never talked to her, because she was unpleasant to talk to, and for years, no one would even say hello to her. But when they saw years later, they were very pleased to notice the change in her behavior. They were really obvious. Even her look is very different from what it used to be. After they greeted each other, the girl's father ordered that a suitable outfit be found for his daughter. And that's when she realized that it looked like they dragged her out here on purpose to cheer her up. And at times like this, she realizes she has a family that cares about her. This best atelier in the empire provided so many incredibly beautiful dresses for her, which were very hard to try on in one day. And most of them fit her very well. There wasn't a single dress that wasn't pretty or didn't suit this girl. She was insanely grateful for this opportunity to choose the very best of what the very best designers had created. While she was choosing a dress for herself and measuring them, her father and brother were watching and talking about how well she looked, to which her father said she was the most beautiful lady in the empire. At some point, they were asked to choose beautiful and appropriate shoes for the dress. After they'd picked everything out and bought the prettiest things, that wasn't all they had prepared for the girl. So they went to another store that Yvonne had chosen, and there they found a very nice piece of clothing, and asked her to try it on, because we had to complete her look. After seeing her in her new clothes, they couldn't expect the girl to look so chic. For a few moments they just froze as if someone had frozen them. Father and brother couldn't even find the words to describe how beautiful she was. When they looked at her for too long, it made her embarrassed, to which they replied that it was okay. At one point, father told her that when Yvonne smiles, she reminds him of her mother, for she was just as beautiful. They talked some more after that. Yvonne continued to get lots of compliments, and it was time to head back in. To end the day well, Barden suggested we go out for tea, to which her father immediately replied, "We could go to a cafe nearby." And then Yvonne assumed that they were doing it on purpose, because they were talking too naturally. Plus, she wanted to get home quickly. She was feeling very tired after all that shopping. When they finally got to the coffee shop, they started asking her if she liked today's purchases, to which she replied that she was very grateful to them for it, and she really liked everything they bought her. But afterward, Yvonne remembered that she had nowhere to go in those beautiful dresses, so it would be okay to take half of them back. It turns out that they bought these clothes for her, and came to the cafe for a reason. And to answer her question, they did tell her that she was about to meet a nice man. And it's 3 days from now, at the same cafe, so she can wear her prettiest dress to the meeting. She wasn't ready for that, because it turned out that this shopping trip wasn't just for fun. It was very hard for her to react normally to it because she didn't know what they were up to or what they wanted to accomplish. To make Yvonne feel a little calmer, her brother and father decided to tell her something about this man, that his name is Rodnan Yels. He is the young head of the Yels family, one of the respected clans of the empire, and that he has many accomplishments to his credit. And she seems to have heard something about him. They say he's a handsome, gentlemanly, and versatile man, admired by all. Afterwards, she asked why such an amazing man would want someone like her, a villainous Yvonne Argentros with a terrible reputation. To which the father reacted very violently. He didn't understand who dared to give his daughter such a nickname. And even Barden backed him up, and began to change her mind, for she is a decent, intelligent, and beautiful girl. After saying that, she was once again very pleased. She felt that this was her real family. Even though she's not even the real Yvonne Argentros, it was still unusual to hear something like that. Then she was informed that all her presents were already wrapped. Dad's gone to the tower. Barden's got some business to take care of. They're both very busy, but they still made time for her. When suddenly some assistant asked her if they were done talking and started yawning. Though when her father was here, he acted quite differently, more polite. Yvonne at that moment wanted to teach him a lesson and show him that she also needed to be treated with respect, even if no one else was around. So she asked what it was on his arm, and the guy was surprised and asked what was wrong, when suddenly, Yvonne made it look like there was a wasp there to scare the cocky guy. And then she slapped him hard on the arm, where it looked as if there was an insect, though in fact it was only an excuse to punish him for disrespecting her. The fellow noticed at once that the girl had very strong hands, and that her blow had unexpectedly hurt him. It was very good news. Plus he'll know what happens when you do that to a girl. When suddenly something amazing and unusual began to happen, like some kind of magic. Yvonne saw some sort of dark purple shadow on the floor at the same second, moving around. Did it have anything to do with the fact that she had just punched a man? It's never happened before, so it was hard to figure out what caused it. It was definitely a magical phenomenon that appeared after her hit. Just what it meant was very interesting. When she realized that she had created it, it was both interesting and unpleasant at the same time. for it was not the most beautiful thing she could see, and because of the unknown, it was doubly scary. Yvonne didn't even know what she should do in this situation, run away from it, or try to figure it out. But that wasn't the worst of it. A while later, this shadow started talking, asking if she was a great magician, and also saying that this wasn't the end. Yvonne certainly thought she might have some powers, but she had no idea that it could make her so scared. If she did, which the girl doubted very much, as suddenly, the shadow disappeared abruptly, and then she starts asking the guy if he saw it, to which he says he doesn't know what she's talking about. The girl began to think that perhaps she might have imagined it, though she knew for sure that she had definitely seen and heard it. The next day, Yvonne decided to give a small gift to her assistant, who was very happy about it. So much so that she said the word thank you more than 30 times. Yvonne, after that amount of gratitude, definitely realized that the helper liked it all. The girl didn't expect anyone to be happy with a few strips of lace fabric. When the assistant saw that her mistress sat down at once to her books, she asked why she was reading something so often, to which Yvonne replied that she wanted to find something. She wanted information on shadow-related monsters, but so far she hadn't found anything of the sort. After that dark talking shadow appeared, she even thought someone wanted to destroy her, and it seems like the genre of this story has changed from romance to thriller, because she constantly feels a sense of anxiety and the unknown. As suddenly, she asked the assistant if she happened to remember telling her not to touch her in any way, only it was still unclear what it was about. But Yvonne realized that the assistant knew something, so she decided to ask her what it was about. Turns out it's the right-hand drawer of the desk in the artifact lab, which is a cabinet for making something dangerous. But the assistant said she really hadn't touched anything. The girl already knew that, but still wanted to know what this place was, since she had only recently reincarnated as Yvonne. We can conclude that Yvonne was really into destroying buildings, and afterwards asked her assistant, when someone wanted to go in there, to let her know about it. The assistant replied that if they discovered that someone had broken in, they would immediately throw an earring that would damage the room in a second, because the jewelry was unusual. It is designed for just such situations when it is necessary to harm the enemy or destroy a room. After saying that, Yvonne realized that this assistant was not as ordinary as she seemed. She had indeed helped her mistress in her plans very often. Evening has come, and the girl is up to something again. Only it remains unknown why she has asked her assistant to inform her when someone enters a certain room, as suddenly, that same evening, she knew of some secret entrance, and for some reason went to the laboratory of the... There was one place that made it possible to get in without anyone noticing. When she went in there, she was very surprised because she thought places like that were usually dark and boring, but it turned out to be the opposite. It was very beautiful all around, and there were so many colorful jars and gems on the shelves. There were also many books and papers on which something was written, and many other interesting things she wanted to find out about. The first thing she did was pick up one of them and began to look at it. What these jars were filled with glowed beautifully, as if there were sparkling particles inside there. After that, she went to the table her assistant had told her about. But the most important thing for her was to find that box of... And it didn't take long for that to happen. It was close by, so Yvonne immediately decided to see what was there. There was her hardcover diary and one book. It remained to be seen why it was so important that she had asked an assistant to guard the place. To make some sense of it all, she went to the diary. She wanted to read what was written there as soon as she could, because it might contain some very important information that could help her in some way. But unfortunately, it wasn't easy. The girl was even a little upset because her strength wasn't enough to open it up. Afterward, she saw some book that she had never seen before, so I immediately turned my attention to her, because she looked like she was unusual or special. And of course she couldn't help but open it and read it, because anything related to the theme of magic and books, she just can't ignore. And there was some really interesting information in there. Yvonne even wanted to take the book with her to read in her room, but unfortunately it can't be done. As suddenly, she finds something about magical memory loss, and even remedies that will help restore all lost magical powers to anyone who has had them. After seeing this book and reading the information, something became obvious to her. It turns out the real Yvonne had magical memory loss. No other explanation for why this book is here yet. The girl thought she'd been failing for a long time to use magic because she's not the real Yvonne, but it turns out it's because she's sick. But fortunately, there is a healing process whereby she can get her powers back. You had to crush 1 kilogram of Thiel's crystal, and if you drink the tea regularly, you might be cured. But there was one problem. The value of this crystal for 1 gram, 10 million gold, and for 1 kilogram, 100 million gold, it was too much money. Meanwhile, the Duke was already climbing in for his first meeting with Yvonne, busy picking out suitable clothing. But with this, he was helped by assistants who were real professionals in their work, and did it without any problems. When they saw the result of their work, said that this garment fit him just perfectly, and they were honored to help him with it. Even his assistant, who was constantly dissatisfied with something, even he liked this image. He then began to ask if there was any interesting news for him, to which the aide replied that there was nothing so far. It was obvious how excited the Duke was about the upcoming meeting. He had even hired the very best clothing designers to please Yvonne. But he wasn't the only one who's also responsibly preparing for this meeting. A girl also spends all her free time preparing herself to look her best at the first meeting. When the assistant was helping to comb her hair, she remarked that perhaps the girl had not slept well at night, for her complexion was too pale. Afterwards, for some reason, Yvonne asked to see her list of possessions because she wants to buy something. But the assistant replied that there had been no change since mine's last sale, to which Yvonne asked if this was the last mine and she had nothing else left. It turns out that Yvonne had spent it all on loans from the magic company, and that was the last of her possessions. It became a real problem, because if it turned out that in some dangerous situation, she couldn't use magic, there could be a lot of trouble. So the girl said that the assistant might not choose jewelry for her for a long time, and instead better pick and prepare the magic ball. And even in this situation, the girl didn't miss the opportunity to compliment the mistress, and said that with any jewelry, she would look gorgeous, so you can really not bother with it. A few minutes later, she had the magic orb on her desk, which she was trying to learn something from. Like if there's any inexpensive teals on sale right now that she really needs. But it turns out that even a man who has a lot of money, even he will not be easy to buy it, because this stone is too few in the empire, because there are too many people who want to buy it. From then on, all she could think about was finding or making more money, because that's really her #1 concern right now, because it's about her health and her capacity. It's gotten to the point where she's already looking at items in her room, with the goal of possibly exchanging them for money. But it did not end there, as she has several dresses. She even thought of selling some of them. Thanks to this will get not a little money. The very date her father and brother had recently arranged for her, to help her in some way. But when her thoughts were only on where to make money, the Duke asked what she was thinking so earnestly about. And then she remembers that she's on that date, so she needs to pay attention to him and not think about her own problems at that moment. The girl already knew this guy was going to be very handsome, but she didn't think his beauty would exceed her expectations. He was much better than she had imagined. Because of that, she even wished she could have been the first to set him up on a second date. But now wasn't the time for that, because she thought it would be better for them if she got out of there as soon as possible. The girl was sure that he was not here of his own free will, so while there was an opportunity, she decided not to miss it. But before she did, she apologized for saying it in the first meeting. Yvonne asked if he could lend her some, though really it took a lot, money. The girl thought that after such words he would be shocked and quickly leave the place. But for some reason he did not leave, and continued to look at her. Because of his long silence, she became very anxious, for fear of how he would react, as suddenly he asked her one question: how much money she would need. She certainly thought he was a very generous man and wouldn't be able to refuse her, but she was still sure he wouldn't do it for some strange girl who demanded it the first time she met him. While she was telling the reason why she needed the money, he started looking for something in his jacket. Because of this, she was even more uncertain what she could expect from him. Though on the other hand, he had already asked how much she needed to. As he was a winner in many contests, every action of his made her nervous and afraid of. But it turns out he just wanted to get his pen out to start writing something down on a piece of paper. It was the perfect opportunity to start admiring his looks while he was busy doing something and not seeing it. Yvonne immediately noticed his long eyelashes, and very beautiful silky and shiny hair. It made me want to ask what shampoo he uses. She even thought he was such a handsome man that he must have been the reason they invented the word beauty. When she started thinking about it too much, decided to stop it and not act like a girl in love. But unfortunately she couldn't do that. She also noticed something about him that seemed incredibly attractive. It was his hands. The girl wondered what he was writing there for so long with his beautiful hands. Even that action looked incredibly graceful. But when she saw the numbers that meant 20 million, she couldn't believe her eyes. She felt a little uncomfortable and embarrassed at the same time, because she just made him do it. So she tried to stop him and explain her request, and that he didn't have to help her at all, as he is a very well-mannered and polite person. Perhaps that is why he did not refuse her. It was important for her that this man did not regret that he had promised to help her. While the Duke was writing something on a piece of paper, Yvonne was trying her best to apologize for her behavior, and for allowing herself to ask something like that of the Duke. In order to somehow look less brazen, she tried to compliment him and act too modestly, not as she had originally done. But when she noticed that she was the only one talking the whole time, she felt even more awkward and uncomfortable. It was as if the girl wasn't letting him say a single word. It was unclear what was better to do in such a situation, whether to talk more or to keep silent. But it turns out it wasn't what she thought it would be after she finally said everything she wanted to say. He decided to tell her that he would give her the money for a reason, which she was very much surprised at, because he smiled suspiciously, which added to the excitement. But to somehow reassure her, he said that it was his personal money and his decision, so she could not worry about it as he had made the decision himself. Duke realizes that giving that amount of money to a strange girl on a first date is a big risk, but he's willing to do it anyway. Yvonne asked him if he didn't think she seemed a bit suspicious or letting herself go too much, to which he replied that she didn't seem to him as some kind of brash or suspicious person, so it was fine. It was only because he was very polite that the girl began to feel more comfortable, when suddenly, he told her a very strange phrase, that she wouldn't have to run away from him. But what it meant, she didn't understand. So she looked him straight in the eye for a few minutes, for he began to speak in some ambiguous phrases that were very hard to understand and figure out what he meant. And whatever her behavior looks like right now, she really needs to run her errands. And after what he said, it'll be doubly suspicious. But it really is time for her to go. It's really hard to imagine what this girl looks like in the Duke's eyes. But either way, she's trying to look like someone who can be trusted with that much money. Since he's a real gentleman, he couldn't let a girl just go somewhere and still be sitting in the same place. So he offered to escort her to Argentro's manor, to which she replied that for some reason it was not necessary to do so. Afterwards, the Duke said he wanted to get to know her better, for she had told him nothing about herself during the date. And of course she was very glad of these words, for it was mutual. She was also madly anxious to get to know him better. But unfortunately she was in a great hurry to go somewhere. So I have to apologize for that, and I promised to spend a lot more time with him next time. Turns out the reason she left was because she thought the Duke wasn't interested in being with her. So she decided to leave first. As suddenly, the Duke asked her for one request. Yvonne noticed that whatever he said, it was always somehow exciting and intriguing. In fact, he was going to ask, if she didn't mind, to call each other by their first names the next time they met. And he asked if she was okay with such a, as he would be insanely pleased to hear her address him by his name, and it was mutual. So the girl accepted the offer. Apparently he was so determined to leave a good impression that he acted like he was in love with her, and was looking forward to their next meeting, although maybe it was true, and it wouldn't even be surprising if he really fell in love with her the first time he met her, because she was incredibly beautiful that night. But in order for the girl to call him by name, he needed to introduce himself, which they forgot to do at the beginning of the date. He said his name was Rodnane. It was the only information besides that he was very handsome that she knew. But still, they'll have time to get to know each other and see if they can be together or not. That said, neither of them has to pretend that everything is fine if it isn't. The girl's father only wanted to introduce her to the Duke, and he'll be really happy if they genuinely love each other. After the girl had gone, she went to the fountain, where there was a quiet place, in order to calm herself a little, for she was sure she was unworthy of this man. It was very foolish of her to think so, for if he didn't like her, he would have left at once, and he wouldn't have promised to give a lot of money to a girl he didn't like. She doubted herself and her looks too much, for they had only met him through his father's. Suddenly some guy comes up to her. Yvonne hasn't had time to calm down after one guy, but another guy shows up right away. He had very beautiful golden hair that immediately catches the eye. He was also a very handsome guy, and the most attractive and incredible thing about him was his blue eyes that you wanted to stare into for as long as possible. He immediately said that lady was too persistent, because even on the day of her date, She was looking for him in the palace. It was a joke, but even because of it, the girl was very embarrassed. This guy is the favorite son of the emperor's concubine. His real mother died, so he was adopted by the current empress. Thus he became the heir, and always only cared about his reputation. Therefore disliked Yvonne. If any of his clothes or accessories were of a color that reminded him of Yvonne, he avoided it in his appearance, and refused her love on several occasions. Could this be the same prince that made the girl so sad, her brother and father thought? He talked to her strangely enough, and sometimes he wouldn't even let her say a word. Even though his looks are handsome enough, against that posh duke, he becomes less attractive to her. Now, she realizes how foolish it was to fall in love with such a man, for there are worthy men with whom she would not feel ill at ease, such as the Duke of Rodnan. Unlike the handsome man she was on a date with, this narcissistic guy seems less deserving of her attention. When she decided to go off on her own, it was unusual for him to have someone walk away from him, and by that act, the girl first made him angry, because she showed him she wasn't interested in talking to him at all. I should have done this a long time ago, so this guy wouldn't be so sure of himself. He didn't like it so much that he grabbed her arm, because he didn't want everyone around him to see someone leaving him. This time, Yvonne would not tolerate such behavior, and decided to remember that she only deserved to be treated with respect, and she was not going to tolerate anything like this. This guy saw that the girl wouldn't let him grab her by the arm, be rude to her, or try to hold her back, just so she wouldn't leave for the sake of her own reputation. So he immediately apologized for what he did, just so she wouldn't start ranting about it when other people were around. It was the perfect moment to humiliate him, as he usually did, towards her. The girl told him that she had long since forgotten him, and she wasn't interested with him. She decided to let him know once and for all that she wasn't the best man she'd ever met, to which he tried not to show that he was possibly offended. Afterwards, to restore his reputation, he tried to say something, but it looked very foolish. Yvonne began to feel very nervous, for she wanted to get away from this man as quickly as possible. That guy even started saying some stupid stuff like the girl wants attention and she's got a date with the Duke to do it. When all of a sudden, this man comes up to them that the girl must have been very happy about. And it was the Duke of Rodnan. He was very timely. Maybe he just sensed that Yvonne needed help at that moment. That's why he came. He knew right away that this guy was probably the one who made the girl's father ask her for support so she wouldn't be sad. It was a very unexpected encounter. But the guy with blonde hair was the most excited at this moment. When people around saw Yvonne standing next to guys like that, everyone immediately started to envy her because they didn't understand how she could have earned their attention. They immediately began to assume that one of them was her lover or something like that. And someone on the contrary thought that these three got together to argue about something and find out some misunderstandings, because there can't be anything good between them. Yvonne was feeling very uncomfortable at this point, for what she disliked most was having a lot of people looking at her. But as always, Rodnan rectified the situation and said he had a gift for her that he didn't have time to give her on the date. He then said that this wasn't the right place, so they could leave and she could look at her gift in a quiet environment. The girl thought he realized she was in a bad situation, so he decided to help her. It was just what she needed. But first she has to say goodbye to the other guy and let him know she's not interested in him anymore. So they decide to leave and spend the evening together without him. She reasoned that their date wasn't over yet, so it was time for them to leave so they didn't waste any time. To which the Duke reacted with understanding and decided to say something as well. At that moment, the girl felt the real male support she had been missing before. After meeting the Duke, the girl finally realizes that you never have to earn someone's love, and there will always come a moment when someone can love someone for who they are. The guy they'd walked away from felt secondary for the first time in a long time, or the one who'd been replaced by someone better, as he usually did. There came a moment when he found himself in the shoes of a girl he'd done the same thing to before, and it all happened when a lot of people around here saw it. Which means that absolutely everyone is about to find out how Yvonne finally got her revenge on him, because now she's not interested in him, because she's found a man who's truly willing to support her and make her happy around him. Yvonne thanked the Duke several times on the way, for it was a very good deed on his part to do that, and afterward told him that she knew he had come here at her father's request and had no idea how hard it had been for him to get here. After saying that, he hesitated for some reason, and it looked like he was uncomfortable hearing it, for which the girl apologized and said that In any case, she was very glad to make their acquaintance, as suddenly he said her name, and after that he was just silent for a while. She was very curious as to what he wanted to tell her. At this point, this situation seemed romantic enough. They were just looking into each other's eyes as if they were communicating with amorous gazes. Even though it was too exciting, both the girl and the Duke were well aware that they probably liked each other, so neither one minded being so close to each other, although none of them explicitly say so, in order not to rush things and gradually come to something more. When they stood there, they did not care whether anyone saw them or not, because everything was so pleasant and comfortable that they did not notice anyone. At some point he started acting differently than usual. It was more like a sign that he liked her. Yvonne's greatest fear was to act strangely, or to disappoint him, and because of that she was getting nervous and anxious. His behavior was as if it were not the first time they had seen each other, but it was the first time. So the girl was afraid that he might be doing it on purpose, and thus was just fulfilling her father's request, which she really doesn't want to do, because he's really her ideal of a man she'd like to date, because no one has ever wooed her the way he does. The main thing for her was to find out how sincere he was with her, and how interested he was in talking to her, aside from the fact that he was doing it at someone else's request, because the Duke didn't say anything to her about knowing, and there were two reasons for that. Either he didn't want to upset her, or he liked her, and for what reason he did, it didn't matter. Since now, despite that, he genuinely wanted to be with her, but he still needed to be convinced of that, so she knew it was too early to draw any conclusions yet. Yvonne would very much like to learn to read minds so that she could immediately know if someone is deceiving her or not, or, for example, in this situation, to understand the purpose for which he is communicating with her. The next day, the Duke was drinking his favorite hot drink with marshmallows as usual, and discussing with his assistant everything that had happened the previous day. So they were only discussing Yvonne. The Duke was sharing his impressions of the girl. The first thing he said about her was not something bad or strange, but on the contrary, he remembered how beautiful her eyes were. At this moment, when he was talking about her, he himself did not notice how he stopped listening to his assistant. It was as if he were talking to himself. Apparently it's for the reason that he really liked her, so he's only thinking about her, and even at that moment, he can't hear anyone else. When suddenly, for some reason, he recalled that his assistant had said he was good-looking, and afterward asked if that was really the case. Perhaps he thought the girl didn't like him enough. He kept thinking about the fact that she was looking at him somehow without emotion, which made him think that she didn't care about him and didn't like him at all. But the aide, as before, started blaming Yvonne for everything, and said she just had a vision problem, after which he realized he had said something unnecessary, and apologized. As suddenly the Duke heard some strange ringing, though such a thing had never happened before, and he wondered what it was. For some reason, Rodnane immediately began to picture an image of Yvonne, but he didn't understand why he was seeing it. It seemed to him as if the lady were calling him by name, or was just trying to remind him of himself by magic at a distance. But this was only his speculation. The aide then asked if the Duke had given the gift he had prepared for her. It turned out that he had completely forgotten to give it to her, and perhaps because of that, he began to feel some strange, disturbing noises. After the lady had left, he realized that he had told her about the gift a while ago. She must have been expecting it. But as a result, Rodnane had simply forgotten to give it to her. He felt bad for her, for he had not kept his promise, and he thought that the girl might be sad now, for she had not received her present. And maybe she just doesn't want to bring it up so she doesn't look too cocky. And all this was added to the thought that perhaps she did not like the Duke at all, for she looked sad, and would not let him know that he was wrong. Duke began to remember how he had helped her, and also at this moment he felt that he was indeed a true savior for her. But after that, he started having very stupid thoughts. Just because the girl was standing next to a guy who had blonde hair, he assumed she liked that kind of hair. After the Duke had already told his assistant everything, it was time to decide what time he was going home tomorrow, to which he replied that he wished to remain in the capital for the time being. He didn't expect that. He didn't understand what was keeping him here. He had only one option, which he didn't want to believe. How suddenly, the Duke needed to know if Lady Yvonne had any major debts. Was he going to help her with that? To which the aide was very surprised. But Rodnane answered him that it was not necessary to try to change his mind so much and so often, for it was his own business whether to help the girl or not. It was a wonder to the Duke why she needed to borrow so much money. After all, her family was considered one of the richest in the empire. He decided that he needed to find out by any means necessary the reason why she needed 200 million. He wasn't interested because he didn't want to help her. He was just curious. Besides, once again, as he relaxed in his office, he didn't notice how he started thinking only of her again. When he was thinking about something, thought it would be nice to prepare some kind of gift for her. Very little time had elapsed after this idea, and the gift for the girl for the morning was already in her room. It was the same teals. It was definitely at least 10 grams. Yvonne imagined that if converted into money, it would be 200 million gold pieces. It was the best and most beautiful gift she'd ever received in her entire life. In that moment, Yvonne realized exactly what Rodnan looked like to the perfect man. It would seem impossible to ruin such a beautiful moment, but her brother and father succeeded. They ran into her room too quickly and started asking about whether she had seen the prince. They didn't seem to like this, to which the girl replied that she had indeed seen him, but most of all, she was only interested in why they looked so strange. Like they've been working too hard because they've got a kind of abnormal complexion. It's like it's closer to gray or blue. At this point they began to feel guilty, as if because of them, the girl had met the one she had been sad about for so long and could not enjoy life. The father said he felt guilty about it, so he would be very happy if the girl could forgive him, since he didn't do it on purpose and didn't mean to hurt her. To which she told him that she was fine, and she was thrilled to have met the Duke, but worried that he might not like her. They conspired and began to reassure her that she was the most beautiful girl they had ever seen and known. No matter how playful it seemed, they still tried to improve her mood. But afterward, her father said the nicest words she had ever heard, that he was proud of such a smart and beautiful daughter. So he asked her not to even think about the fact that someone might not like her. It was nice for her, because after such words, she stops herself more confident and forgets that some unpleasant words can be said to her. And fortunately, lately she hears only compliments. As suddenly, Yvonne had something to tell him. It turns out she had decided to forget everything that had happened before, so she decided to start her own business. But her father and her brother didn't quite know what she meant. Only there was one very important point. She needed money for it. Of course, she told them about it right away and asked for a little help, to which they reacted much better than she had imagined. Even her father praised it, and said that sometimes, such insolent behavior can lead to a good result. After that, she told them a specific amount, and even offered to give it to them with interest, so that they would definitely accept it. To which her brother replied that it was the price of just a few outfits, so he would give her the money for nothing. But she refused for some reason. Yvonne said she is writing a formal promissory note, and will take a debt from her father that she is sure to repay, as it is important for her to gain his trust. Somewhat surprisingly, her father didn't start insisting that he would give her the money just like that, without any formal arrangement, and still agreed to her proposal. He explained that this way she could learn how to run a business faster, to which she thanked them, and said she would try not to disappoint them. After his daughter didn't just ask for money for her own affairs, she offered a formal contract stating that she would pay back the money. He was pleased to realize that she had changed for the better. Now he understands exactly how important it is for her to gain his trust, and for that she's willing to give up a huge amount of money with interest. Afterward, the girl's brother asked what Yvonne had said about her last date with the Duke, but her father was unaware of this. He hoped to arrange for them to meet again, depending on her reaction. The most important thing for him was for the girl to truly forget that prince, and not try to convince them that she really didn't love him anymore, just so they wouldn't worry about her. The prince is heir to the throne, but he doesn't have a strong power yet. He became heir because he was adopted by the empress, and that can change at any moment. To which the boy asked if his father meant that he wanted to influence the choice of an heir. The father replied that if the prince ceased to be the crown prince, he would no longer be able to look down on their family. The boy wondered if he would do that for his daughter. After all, their family had never interfered in the affairs of the imperial family. It turns out it's not just for his daughter's sake. The king's illegitimate daughter, Mare, who was brought in by the prince, doesn't inspire him with confidence. The guy agreed with that, and said that he was exactly the same opinion. Her healing skill that she used to save the prince was beyond the normal level, so he was also thinking of investigating it. As a result of the conversation, the father entrusted the matter to his son, since he is also interested in this. And also, he asked him to contact the third prince. Only what this is for is not yet known. Meanwhile, the girl was in her office and her assistant came to see her. She had some 2 letters, but no one knew who might have sent them. So it was very interesting to find out. Yvonne might have guessed that perhaps it was the Duke, but then it was unclear who the second letter was from. But it turned out that the assistant knew from whom the letters were from, and told her mistress at once. It appeared that one of them was from the Duke of Yale's, and the other from the Crown Prince of the... This news was half good and half bad. A letter from the Duke she would have loved to read and respond to. Only a letter from the Crown Prince. She didn't even want to open it. She longed to turn back the clock, to avoid that recent meeting with the prince, to avoid receiving that letter from him. But without even opening and reading the letter from the Duke, she somehow began to think it was possible he had written to her about how he didn't enjoy the date, and they would never see each other again, even though it even sounded too silly. But she believed it. But at the same time, she didn't want it to be so. And about the second letter, she suspected that perhaps the prince had prepared something bad for her, because of the fact that last time she had offended him very much and humiliated him in front of everyone around her. When the assistant noticed this, she realized for sure that Yvonne had made up these options for herself, and because of this, she was now afraid and unable to read the letters in peace. The assistant kept trying to calm the girl down, because her excitement would make people wait too long for an answer from her. And after a while she decided to read them all, and asked me to give them to her before she changed her mind. And yet she was still a little anxious to read them. Yvonne even thought about the fact that the Duke might ask for his gift back. Or worse, say they would never meet again. The thing she'd hate most of all was that Duke would write something bad. After that, she'd definitely be disappointed in guys forever, and wouldn't be able to socialize with anyone for a few years if that happened. Though she had already opened the letter and was ready to read it, she looked as if through the sheet and saw no words. And when the time came that she finally made up her mind, she started reading. It said that he really enjoyed last night's date, and was also concerned if she liked his gift. And if she has any time, he'd like to ask her for something, and he'd be very grateful if she'd agree to it. He asked if she would like to go with him to the opera tomorrow and spend the day together. After that, it said he would look forward to hearing from her. There was no way Yvonne could have expected this letter to be an invitation for a second date. It meant he definitely liked her. Otherwise, he would have just gone home. She was even told about it by her assistant, and she was very happy about it, which only means that the Duke doesn't mind and will be very happy to have a new date. But that wasn't the most surprising thing. It turns out the girl wanted to send a rejection, and the assistant couldn't understand what the reason was at all. The girl explained that he must have sent the letter as a courtesy, for he had come to visit at his father's request. She was sorry to turn down such a man, but because of her pride and fear, she missed her happiness. As for the letter from the prince, she did not even want to open it, but to make a long story short, it was about an invitation to a tea party Cordelia was throwing. But that was the same as threatening to make the girl promise not to use her magic. It was outrageous to her how he dared to treat her like a criminal at all. For only a short time ago, Lady Yvonne had said she had forgotten him, and now he was suddenly sorry. It simply could not be so. The girl decided to write a reply, and asked her assistant to bring the paper for the letter now. Meanwhile, it was tea time. Everyone had gathered and the tea ceremony had begun. Everyone present discussed that it was no wonder the place was called the Green Palace, because the summer flowers looked so bright and fresh, except that the prince took no part in the conversation at all, for the obvious reason that his thoughts were only on Lady Yvonne, who had not yet arrived. It was very surprising to him, because he was not used to accepting rejection, or seeing that someone might not be interested in him. He remembered how she used to try to get an invitation any way she could if she knew he was going to be at an event. But now, the girl just realized that she doesn't have to get attention from men who don't care about her. It's better to spend time with those who appreciate her attention and love. The prince was sure that the girl had said those words just to get him to notice her. But in fact, she really didn't care about him anymore. When everyone noticed that the prince wasn't participating in the conversation, he was immediately asked some question that he didn't even get to hear. It turns out they were discussing what was once a very dangerous battlefield. The prince immediately continued the conversation, and said that Cordelia had once saved his life, and it was all thanks to her magic of recovery. All the girls around admired the story because Cordelia kept him alive. The girls said that this skill was passed on to her from her ancestors, for which she is very grateful to them. After that, the topic of conversation changed a bit. Some girl asked if they knew about an interesting piece of news, that the Duke of Yales was recently on a formal rendezvous with Lady Argentros. And of course the subject was very unpleasant to the prince, for he now realized that it was all true, and no one was trying to get his attention in this way. And when he heard that in order to be with Lady Yvonne longer, the Duke had stayed in the capital, he simply could not believe what he was hearing. For now the prince was no longer of any use to anyone, and all the girls turned to the Duke and began to envy Lady Yvonne, which has greatly diminished the prince's self-esteem, and now no one even talks about him. For example, this time, the girls were talking to each other and complimenting each other on their skin condition, to which some thanked and replied that it was simply the result of daily grooming in the morning. Everyone stopped noticing the prince's presence so much that they started asking each other to share their beauty secrets. He even felt superfluous in this conversation, though it had never happened before, and all the attention was only on him. Yvonne, meanwhile, was busy looking for some information. It was a supply agreement for some kind of plant, only what she needed it for was not yet clear. The girl concluded that it was indeed a brilliant product because it was inexpensive, so with her father's money, she was able to buy the rights to it. This plant is commonly used as an antipyretic, but is not a good remedy, unlike more effective medicines. But that's only if you use it as a fever remedy. In the story, when Hadrian and Cordelia return to the capital, an unknown skin disease has appeared among the aristocrats. Cordelia, who was an illegitimate child, was not accepted in high circles, but she found a way to cure this disease, thus changing attitudes about herself. Cordelia's been giving it away for free, but she's not so eager, because she's the villain Yvonne. Since she's caught up in the plot of the novel, she decides she needs to use all the information she has, and make 200 million because of it. So the girl decided not to waste time, and immediately went to one place, in which she will realize her plans in reality. Yvonne realized that if she wanted to sell at a high price, it was important to think about packaging so that it was appropriate. The very product she plans to sell, it is really in demand for most girls, so it should look high quality and at the same time cure skin disease. Besides, it is really very much needed by many people. It will be natural handmade cosmetics, which with a high probability will want to buy a lot of people, and in the future, perhaps become regular customers. Yvonne's plan for the day was to find a store space and get production up and running sooner rather than later, before the disease spreads yet. For a moment, the girl looked toward the prince's palace, where he was probably having tea with his princess right now. She realized that she had probably made the right choice in not going along with his proposal. Thereby perhaps he would realize that there was no need to be too high-minded about herself, since she wasn't interested in him anymore. And the girl finally realized that she was making a big mistake running after him and getting his attention. Since then, she started to feel much better about herself. At one point, there was a strong wind outside, and a lot of dust flew in her face. It got a lot of dust in her eyes, making it hard to see. But in this situation, there was something pleasant. It turns out that the girl was waiting for a little surprise and a very pleasant meeting. That day, Lady Yvonne had no idea she might meet this man just down the street. But when it happened, she forgot all her plans and things. Apparently she really wanted to see him and didn't expect it to happen so soon. Of course it was Duke Rodnan. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. But even though the girl was really in a hurry, she didn't run away and stayed in the same place. Except that there was just one unpleasant moment. Besides them, there were many other people around that made the girl feel uncomfortable. All at once began quietly discussing the Duke and Lady Yvonne, for it was the first time they had seen them together. The people around me were acting very brazen and watching like they were watching a TV show. For this reason, the girl prefers to communicate in a quieter environment, where there are no strangers who only do what they do and envy or spread rumors. Since Yvonne wasn't used to being the center of attention, she wasn't comfortable being there. But at the same time, when she looked at him, she just forgot that someone was looking at them. After all, he had such a handsome appearance, and it seemed as if he was all glowing with charm, even when just standing there and saying nothing. So, for some reason, Yvonne made the decision not to look him in the eye, and it looked very strange, as if she didn't notice him. But she still couldn't ignore his presence. So after a few minutes, she started looking at him. For the girl, the Duke's eyes were the most beautiful she had ever seen. And because of this, Lady Yvonne sometimes didn't even hear when he said or asked her something. But this time, this meeting was a little awkward, because the girl had recently refused to meet him, and she would probably be very embarrassed about it now. The Duke said, even though he had been turned down by her, he was insanely happy about this chance encounter. She felt guilty for daring to say no to such a handsome guy, even though she didn't really mind another date. Afterwards, the Duke offered, if she would allow it, to spend some time with her, and also, if necessary, to accompany her on some business. Recently the girl was sure that he had only offered to meet out of politeness, but now it looked like the Duke was really sincere about wanting to take a walk with her. Since they'd been talking long enough for people around them to spread gossip about it, Duke Yells was barely featured in the story, only mentioned as the ruler of the northern lands. And this Duke suddenly goes on a date with Yvonne, who is sick with a strange rare disease. After reincarnating in her body, many events have gone awry, so she should be cautious of those she knows little about, because there are too many contradictions in the novel. For example, a close person turned out to be a traitor. Besides, there is nothing wrong in being cautious, as the girl thought. Because of these foolish thoughts and suppositions, she once more refused the Duke, and suggested that he had better go for a walk with one who knew the capital well. The guy just didn't understand why she was constantly ignoring him. After all, Yells had only come to the opposite, to constantly go out and spend time together. But even though he refused, the Duke still tried to insist, and by doing so proved to her that he really did want to spend time with her. Those were the words that Lady Yvonne wanted to hear from him. And perhaps now she would realize that everything he was doing was not just because the girl's father had asked him to do it. It turns out that in order to earn her trust, you have to keep proving that the Duke does things of his own free will. When the girl's refusal was heard by the people and her assistant, everyone wondered madly how she could even afford to refuse a man like the Duke. The aide went on to say that Lady was too harsh on Yales, and that he deserved to be treated better than that. And yet this walk took place. Fortunately, the Duke would not take any refusal, and in consequence obtained his own. Eventually, the girl let go of her escorting knight, and went for a walk with her boyfriend. Not surprisingly, the knight was only happy about it, because now he was free. And besides, Yvonne would be near her lover. No matter how much she denies it or hides it, she herself knows that she would love it if they ever met and truly loved each other. At one point, the Duke asked why the girl was always walking around accompanied by a knight, to which she replied that it was only for safety's sake. As suddenly, she realizes that the real Yvonne was a magician who didn't need anyone to be safe. It turns out that those silly questions weren't so silly, and it's really strange to the real Yvonne that she might need a chaperoning knight. To justify it in some way, and not to create suspicion, Yvonne said it was just for extra insurance, as caution never hurts. To which he smiled, and not so some kind of answer. Just saying that maybe she's right, and even a villainess like that might need extra security sometimes. At that moment, the girl started to get very worried, because just now, the guy might have guessed that something was wrong with her. In order not to be so nervous, she decided to change the subject, and then suggested we go shopping together. He didn't mind, and to keep the conversation going, he asked if she liked shopping. His questions began to irritate her, and she felt as if she were under interrogation. She didn't want him to think she was a shopaholic, so she told him to spend less money, to which he asked if she didn't enjoy shopping and picking out all that jewelry, shoes, bags and stuff. And then he remembered that he had once given her jewelry, and assumed it must have been a mistake. But it wasn't. Since it was a luxury item, Yvonne might not have liked it. But that was an exception because the bracelet was really useful. So at that moment, it was what she needed, and she was genuinely happy about the gift. Even now, remembering the Duke's gift, she has this pleasant emotion and gratitude for it. Since this crystal was not only precious but also capable of curing her illness, he was worried for nothing. So the girl pleased him a little, and the Duke now did not think his gift was useless. He felt much better, and after her words he was visibly relieved. They still have a little trouble finding things to talk about, but that's just because they haven't spent enough time together. After a few minutes of silence, he decided to rectify the situation and started asking a lot of questions. as if he was trying to find out everything at once. But that was not all. As usual, whenever they met, he could not resist, and began to compliment her, which made her look even more beautiful. At this point, she noticed that she was starting to get very embarrassed, so it was necessary to calm down and stop worrying. After all, it was probably only said out of politeness, so Yvonne just said thanks for that and moved on to the next topic. But at that moment, they were walking past some girls who noticed them and started admiring the Duke. Of course they had taken notice, greeted him, and didn't notice that they had distracted him from his conversation with the girl, though they probably didn't care about that either. These girls introduced themselves. It turned out to be the Vicomte Frantia's wife and daughter. Despite the fact that these girls wanted to talk to him, the Duke replied that he was very happy to see them, but now, unfortunately, busy, and will not be able to talk to them. Afterwards, they apologized for their insolent behavior, because they really didn't ask if he had time to talk to them. Lady Yvonne was pleasantly surprised by his action. He just acted like a real man who didn't want to keep his girlfriend waiting by socializing with other girls. At one point, Duke had confided in her that he was eager to learn as much as he could about her, which was why he'd suggested going on a second date that time. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, because in her stupidity, Yvonne thought much worse of him than he really was, and he just really wanted to talk to her and get to know her better, because if he really didn't like her, he would have gone home a long time ago. Only Yvonne hadn't thought about it at all, and still didn't realize that this guy was actually interested in her. How suddenly she starts putting the so-called puzzle together in her mind, and remembers how often he tried to approach her, to ask her out, asked a lot of questions, and was only interested in her, while telling little about himself, or how often he cares for her, even if there are many people around who can create a lot of gossip. That's all. He wasn't afraid, and openly showed his feelings, all of which suggests that Yales may be genuinely starting to fall in love with her, and that's why he's acting like this. But after the girl saw the coat of arms of the Yales family, she remembered that the Duke had another reason for treating her this way. The history of the imperial family. Verbant Yvonne studied honestly in her classes, the secret investigative organization of the imperial family. Since an official investigation was impossible, they operated in secret. They were said to be closely connected to one of the 4 largest clans in the empire. The girl even knew that no one had ever seen them in person. If the Isles family is responsible for the secret investigation of the imperial family, then everything falls into place. And it seems like everything she thought was so romantic about him, he did it for personal gain. But it still remains strange that the girl's father had only asked him for 1 date, and why he needed to suggest a second, and even just to walk around now with Lady Yvonne like that. If you recall, in the story Yvonne was getting more and more violent, so the prince ordered a secret surveillance on her. It turns out that the Duke might be the prince's spy to spy on her, and the thought made her very scared and uncomfortable. Because of this, it made her very uncomfortable to be near him. For now she began to suspect him that perhaps he was not what he tried to appear to be. At the moment when the girl was thinking about it, she almost crashed into a tree. But luckily the Duke noticed it and didn't let it happen. But he still admonished her to be more careful. And even after that act, Yvonne thought he was being nice to her on purpose to put her guard down. But she thanked him anyway, and promised to be more attentive. It's better if she can demonstrate that she's not a threat to Adrian and relieve him of his responsibilities. Meanwhile, after a bit of excited talk, misunderstandings, mistrust, they finally arrived at their destination. It was a very large store, with an incredible selection of different cosmetics, accessories, and clothing. It had a very beautiful interior, friendly counselors, a welcoming atmosphere, and nice people around. Every detail was so exquisite and magical that Lady Yvonne had a desire to buy absolutely everything she saw. And of course it did not do without the fact that they were noticed by absolutely everyone around them. But still they tried not to pay attention to it. The Duke asked for whom the girl chooses cosmetics, to which she replied that she wanted to buy herself something interesting and beautiful. To which the guy said that, in his opinion, she didn't need cosmetics to look good. She looked fine as she was, but that compliment didn't make her happy. It only made her angry. Yvonne didn't like the fact that he controlled her too much. But still she tried to pretend that everything was fine. After which the guy asked what exactly she wanted here. To which Yvonne replied, since this store mostly sells brightly colored cosmetics, it doesn't suit her. So you have to choose some other store as there is nothing suitable here. Luckily, there were a lot of cosmetics stores around, so it didn't take me long to find another location. All of these stores were incredibly luxurious and felt like a welcoming atmosphere. It was even hard to decide which one was the best. The first thing they noticed after entering any store was the very polite consultants. It was insanely pleasant to talk to them. And when they were addressed by name, Yvonne didn't expect it. It turned out that they knew the representatives of the noble families quite well here. And of course, the most pleasant thing was the luxurious aroma that could be felt in every corner of the store, which created the best impression and wanted to stay there as long as possible. And when Lady Yvonne noticed the familiar scent, she asked if all these cosmetics were made from plants. Well, the consultant thanked her for noticing that, and replied that it was absolutely true. After that, Yvonne picked up some cosmetic product, and asked me to tell you more about it. Since the consultants knew very well all the information about what they sell, it was not difficult for them to explain what properties this or that cosmetic has. After a little time, it turned out that this store has such a good service that they offer to try their cosmetics before the customer makes his choice. For the girl, it was insanely pleasant, because it is so much easier to determine what suits her best, and what do not even need to pay attention to. Yvonne, after a while, determined for sure here, she would definitely be able to make the cosmetics she needed. The lady had not noticed at all that a very long time had passed since they had come here. So the Duke began to wonder more and more how girls could spend half a day in such stores, and to make him too bored, Yvonne thought of something, because there was a slight injustice in something. Namely, some time ago, the girl received a gift from the Duke, but she didn't give him anything herself, so she decided to fix it. Even though he may turn out to be a spy, he's still less implicated. And the fact that he's running his errands isn't so bad. So it's the boss's fault, not his subordinate's fault. Apparently the girl is just trying to justify him, although he may not be the spy she suspects him to be. And yet the lady tried to give him a little surprise, and for that she asked him to come to her. He was so sweet at that moment that even his presence and look made her feel better. Afterwards, Lady Yvonne took some cream for something from the very jar about which she had asked for some information. After that, asked the counselor to support her, only it was still unclear what she was doing it for. Then, Yvonne asked to give her his hand. Apparently she wanted him to feel how high quality this cream was, and how quickly it could improve the quality of her skin. Of course he agreed. Only initially he did not understand what she was going to do, because the girl did not explain anything, but simply asked for his hand. Afterward, she carried this gorgeous cream on his hands, but even at that moment, she began to admire his appearance, and especially his hands. They seemed to her incredibly masculine, strong, handsome. And also, it was insanely nice for the lady to touch him and put cream on his hands. It was a very romantic moment that brought them a little closer together. Yvonne realized that maybe she didn't need to think about it, but the girl was willing to even have a rock thrown at her by people who would look at his hands and not think the same thing she did. Afterward, the girl asked him if the Duke noticed a difference after applying this fine cream, but because he took so long to answer, Lady Yvonne thought that perhaps she had been too rude, and he might not like the touch. In order to somehow rectify the situation, she decided to explain that she just wanted to thank him for the gift, and the only thing she could think of was cream, which she was ashamed of, because a man like him should be given completely different gifts. At least she thought so. When she felt very embarrassed in front of him, Yvonne couldn't think of anything else to do, so she just decided to leave, and said that she was very ashamed of her behavior, after which the Duke tried to stop her, and said that the cream was very good indeed, so he thought about really starting to take care of his skin. Besides, it felt insanely good. After saying that, the girl felt better and changed her mind about running off somewhere else. She even started to listen to him, though maybe he said it so that the girl wouldn't get too upset or uncomfortable. Or maybe he really liked the result after that cream and told her the truth. Either way, those words helped, and the lady changed her mind about running away after all. Meanwhile, too many people had gathered in the prince's palace to discuss the subject of Lady Yvonne and the Dukes. When the prince went outside after seeing this, he wondered why all these people weren't leaving since the event was long over. Besides, he was curious to know what they were talking about. It turned out that all these people were discussing the Duke and Lady Yvonne's date, which was of course obvious and not at all surprising. The prince could guess at once what made these people gather and discuss something. They were always more interested in other people's lives and news than in their own. The guy had of course assumed what they were all talking about, but when he got confirmation, the news made him anxious and noticeably spoiled his mood. After that, all these people said goodbye and said they had to go about their business. Prince, he's still convinced that by doing so, she's just trying to make him jealous, which he's very much mistaken about. As suddenly, unexpectedly, he admitted to himself that he was beginning to like Lady Yvonne. Only he did not yet realize that he was a little late. He should have thought about it a little earlier, when the girl tried to confess it to him, and he did not even want to listen to her. With his behavior, he upsets the princess very much, for she notices that the prince only thinks of Lady Yvonne, and every time it gets more and more obvious and noticeable, the girl starts to feel secondary, and that's very unpleasant. And because of that, she became very nervous, because she doesn't understand how the prince, after he ignored her all the time, can think of this girl so often after a while. He had told her many times how he didn't care about her, only in fact, it turns out at this point, it was only after Yvonne stopped paying attention to him that he started to notice her, which was very unpleasant for the princess. She saw perfectly well that when the prince remembered or heard of Lady Yvonne, he became jealous of her and the duke. Such feelings cannot show those who have absolutely no interest. Because of his high self-esteem, he cannot accept the fact that someone stopped considering him as his ideal and seek his attention. Now the princess has to think about how to get the prince's attention again, because with this, they have a clear problem. When the princess went to the courtyard to take a little walk and get some fresh air, she saw someone. It was someone familiar to her, but the princess has little and infrequent contact with him, so they were just acquaintances. It turns out it was Lady Yvonne's brother, Barden Argentros. During the conflict between the empires, with the help of healing magic, the princess was able to easily manage to favor those around her, and the only one who did not succumb to her influence was the Duke of Barden. But now, the girl suggested that perhaps with his help, she might be able to win back the prince's interest in her. But it's not clear how she's going to do it. There are no misunderstandings or conflicts between them, but she has no other way to get what she wants. What she means by that, we can only assume. Meanwhile, the Duke and Lady Yvonne are still in that cosmetics store, and apparently the girl has decided to give the guy the cream as a thank you, for which he thanked her, and said he was very pleased to receive a present from her, at which the girl was very much surprised, for it was only a cream, and he was too much pleased with it, as if he did not sincerely do it. In order to avoid an awkward silence, the guy decided to mention that this cream has a very pleasant rose scent, to which the girl replied that she had specially selected this fragrance, and besides, it suits him very well. It sounded a little strange. The Duke even asked how a person like him, a man, could suit the fragrance of some flowers. Yvonne said that in her opinion, all handsome guys are suited to the scent of flowers, though perhaps that's her personal opinion, which may differ from his. At that moment, the girl remembered what she had recently suspected him of, and after they had spent quite a lot of time together, she thought she had already proved that she was not a threat to him, and now there was no point in him spying on her. It certainly sounds very strange, but still, she thought about it and was sure it could be true. When they were calmly walking and talking about different topics, at this moment, the girl's brother comes running up to them, which they did not expect at all. But it turns out that he came to his sister, and to the guy with whom she had a date. But for some reason, he looked a little angry, although he himself suggested such an option, that his sister went on a date with the Duke of Yale's. He told her that rumors of her date with the Duke had reached not only the Academy, but also the Imperial Palace. But Yvonne tried to explain to him that it wasn't really a date. It remains unclear what Barden didn't like about the girl's time with the Duke, for he was not against it himself, and wanted her sister to forget that prince as soon as possible, and go out with the Duke. The first thing the girl's brother did, he greeted the Duke and introduced himself. He didn't seem like he was going to start a conflict with him. He just wanted to know if Yvonne was doing well when she was on a date, to which the lad introduced himself in return, and said he was immensely pleased to meet Lady Yvonne's brother. After that, they shook hands, and it was clear that no one was going to cause a conflict. The Duke told Barden that he looked a lot like his sister, and also, it turns out he's really handsome, and he was told the truth about him, for which the lad thanked, for he had not expected to hear such compliments from the Duke on their first meeting. Lady Yvonne concluded, since the Duke had managed to charm even her brother, it seems the Duke is really good with everyone, no matter if it's a guy or a girl. Afterward, the Duke said he had heard a great deal about Barden, and he had always wanted to meet him, so he invited them to dinner tonight. To which the guy replied that, unfortunately, that's just not possible. Plus he had something he wanted to tell him. His sister has been trying to start a new life lately, so he asked her not to get her hopes up just out of curiosity, because it could hurt her a lot if she doesn't get what she was promised. And then, Yvonne realized that her brother had been following them all along, so that the girl would not fall in love with this man, and the situation that had recently occurred because of the prince would not happen. Maybe as a brother, he does have a right to worry about his sister, but in this case, he's trying to decide too much for her without considering her opinion. Duke then asked why he thought anyone was trying to give the girl empty hopes, for that was not at all true, and then said that the girl had recently decided to spend her time on self-development instead of dating. It was certainly true, but the girl even at that moment thought of the fact that the Duke was only saying it to appear as they wanted him to appear. But still she felt bad for her brother, because he was talking and she was embarrassed. At one point, Barden decided to say goodbye, and said that it was time for him and his sister to leave now. The girl felt very unpleasant, for it turned out that her brother had just spoiled this so-called date, and had himself decided when she should have left. To make up for the situation in some way, Yvonne looked at the Duke, and thanked him for today. But he didn't say anything in response because he still didn't realize how the girl's brother could tell her who to talk to, and who not to talk to. Meanwhile, the Duke was already in his study, and as usual called his assistant in to see if he had done what he had asked him to do some time ago, to which he replied that he had finally dealt with the inquiry into Lady Yvonne's financial condition, for which he had asked for a. The Duke was insanely interested to know about it, because for a long time he had been wondering about the girl's financial situation, and whether she had any problems with it, since she had asked him for a huge amount of money. The assistant told him that Lady Yvonne had no debts, nor did she lend money to anyone. She was crystal clear about that. After he had told him everything, he immediately asked why his master looked so bad. As suddenly, the Duke for some reason asked the aide about how one can confess feelings to a girl who needs no money, no expensive gifts, no dates, to which the assistant asked, "Did this girl really say so herself? Because if she doesn't want anything, it means rejection. In his opinion, it's just obvious. So it's better not to waste time on it, and go back home." And afterward he said that he had never yet been able to suppose that such a man as the Duke, what kind of girl could ever refuse him, much less such a one as Lady Yvonne. After a while, the Duke remembered that he had unexpectedly received a gift from her today, so he resolved to ask what it could mean on her part, whether, if she cared so little, she would be a present. To which the assistant replied that she had merely put a wall between them, and given reason to hope for more, for it was not for nothing that she was called a villainess. This phrase was very much disliked by the guy, so he made it clear with his whole look that it was better not to say it, because he liked her, and he respected this girl, and afterward decided to tell him straight out not to dare speak of her like that again, either in his presence or to any other person, or else he would regret it very much. To which the aide replied that he was just worried about him, and afterwards apologized for his words, and promised never to talk about her like that again. Afterwards I asked him what his assistant was so much concerned about, to which he replied that from the outside, he was just one of the fish in the lady's aquarium. But the lad was a little surprised at the comparison, for he had never heard an example ever made in this way before. It turns out that this is now a fashionable expression. In the capital, it means that a person continues to meet with an admirer, although has no intention of developing this relationship, as if keeping fish in a tank. After these words, he began to really think about it, although in fact, his assistant has no idea how everything really happens, and how the girl really feels about the Duke. Even though she ignores him a lot and doesn't let him know she really likes him, it's her defensive reaction after her failed relationship with the prince. And it's really weird that the Duke still hasn't realized it. Now it's really hard for her to start trusting some guy, so she's trying every way she can to test him or make sure he's sincere. In this situation, she even mistakenly thought that perhaps the Duke was the real spy of the man with whom she had formerly been unrequitedly in love, and because of whom they had recently met at all, No one knows yet that Lady Yvonne will actually be really happy if it turns out that the Duke is really in love with her, and only then can she reciprocate. But first you have to be sure of it, or hear it from him personally. The guy wondered if it was Yvonne's aquarium. It wasn't so bad, but it wasn't exactly an option he was willing to take on. Besides, being in such a fishbowl makes no sense. Because of that horrible prince, Yvonne does not allow anyone to be near her, and also stopped believing and trusting everyone, even when the person with her is really sincere. It becomes insanely interesting. What exactly, after this conversation with the assistant, the Duke is going to do? Because the main thing that because of this assistant, he did not start to believe that she does not like him. It turns out that he decided to start paying attention to her, and perhaps this time, he will try much better, because now it is very important that the girl begins to trust him. Otherwise, nothing will work out, except that what he started to act on was a rather unexpected option. The Duke had asked his assistant to do something, and told him that this time, it was very important. It turns out that the Duke has decided to deal with the prince first, and only then can he be sure to improve relations with Lady Yvonne. Meanwhile, in the palace of the girl's family, their recent date has long been discussed. The first thing the girl tried to convince them of was that it wasn't a date, and as sure as they were of that, she asked them to believe her. And also her brother hoped that his sister had no interest in Duke Yales, to which she replied that she wasn't interested in him at all, and that she was tired of saying it all the time, because they'd just met by chance on the street. Afterwards, her brother told her that the Duke spoke in such a soft voice that she might not herself see herself succumb to his charms, so she must be careful, to which she replied to him if he had seen her face when she met him. It seems that the Duke also tried to charm him in the same way, which the brother of the girl tried to deny in every possible way, and said that it was all untrue. He perfectly controlled himself at that moment, and nothing like that happened. After a little time, evening came on, and Barden went to rest a little, for the day had indeed been very full and difficult. He decided to take a bath before going to bed, and think a little about what had happened that day. No matter how hard he tried to convince his sister that it was better for her not to talk to the Duke, he couldn't do it. Although he's not really doing it to forbid her anything. On the contrary, it's important to him that the same situation doesn't happen again. Like when she was sad about the prince because she mistakenly thought he was the best guy she'd ever seen. The same thing he thinks is happening in this situation. He's trying to help her and worry about her and she doesn't realize it, or doesn't want to understand because at the moment when she's around Duke, she's actually been happy in a long time. It's probably because of that. She just doesn't want to believe that he could turn out to be a bad person like her brother seems to be. So he decided when his father came back to talk to him about it, because he didn't think his sister could be happy with that guy, as if he could see the prince's face in front of him, and because of that, he became very nervous. It's certainly good that Barden is so worried about his sister, but at the same time, he needs to realize he doesn't have the right to make any decision for his sister. Since she's an adult, she has the right to do what she thinks is right. This man was so disgusting to him that even his face evoked very negative emotions. The guy even thought about the fact that if he wasn't a prince, he would have punished him long ago for the way he had treated his sister, and would have been responsible for every tear she had caught. When suddenly he remembered something, and it seemed to be very important, for at that moment he rose abruptly, and began to do something, and after that, looked in the direction of some bracelet. Only as yet it was unclear what it was that interested him so much, or what it was that he remembered that could not be put aside for later, or for the next day. Is very strange that the Duke at this moment cancelled his evening rest just because he remembered something. Surely it must be really something important. It turns out he'd recently picked up a strange print and almost forgot about it, when suddenly, in the room he was in, some kind of creature appeared. Only the guy hasn't noticed it yet, but it looks a little scary. A few minutes later, the creature had grown several times its size, and was even larger than Barden's height. It was strange that he still didn't notice anything. Was this creature really so silent? When suddenly he noticed something strange, and when he thought of looking back to make sure there was no one there, he was a few seconds short of reacting in time to defend himself against the monster. But he still doesn't know where it came from, and for what purpose. It was too late to try to defend himself, for the creature was already too close, and it would take him a few seconds to do what he had appeared to do. It looked just awful. It had some kind of glowing yellow eyes, a lot of legs, and whatever it could hurt burden with. Apparently the guy has never seen it, and has no idea how it could be defeated, although it seems that it is simply impossible, at least because of the fact that this creature is simply huge, and also it was unknown what abilities it has. It turned out to be very strong and fast. Because of that, the guy just had no chance to react in time, and after such a surprise and fear, to realize what was happening and start defending himself. Even the strongest man would have taken time to somehow react and realize how to defeat this monster. When suddenly, the very bracelet he had remembered a while ago fell out and rolled away. Not only did the guy not know what his abilities, weaknesses, and more were, he had no idea what he needed, or how it had even managed to get into his room in the first place. Could it be that someone wanted revenge on Barden, and thus tried to frighten or destroy him? The purpose of this is still unknown, so it is very interesting to know what kind of creature it was, or who tried to harm the lad in this way. As suddenly, unexpectedly, he began to use his abilities in magic. At this time he was reciting some special words and phrases that should help destroy this creature. But it wasn't as easy as he had imagined. As he tried to destroy one monster, another one appeared in the room. It was exactly the same size, and looked just as intimidating. The most amazing thing is that people who should have come running to help a long time ago, they're still not here. It means that communication with the outside world has been disrupted by magic, and perhaps no one can hear these sounds and come to the rescue. When this creature was alone, he thought it was simply impossible to deal with, and there was no situation that could be worse. But it turned out that there was. Another monster had been added, and there was no telling how many more might appear in the near future. But it turns out someone did hear those loud noises when the guy was trying to defend himself, and there was a chance someone would come to his rescue. And it was Lady Yvonne. She was the first to hear the sounds. Afterwards she asked her assistant if she had heard anything, but it turned out she hadn't. Yvonne didn't wait a second, because she was very anxious. She immediately left her room and started to look into where that sound was coming from. She was sure she was definitely not imagining it. It was as if she sensed that her brother was in danger and needed help at this moment. Almost immediately, the girl determined where she needed to go, and surprisingly, the assistant still didn't understand how Yvonne could have heard anything, because she was sure that nothing had happened, and she had just imagined it. When they came at last to Barden's room, Lady Yvonne was certain that those strange sounds might have come from that room, and she was right. Perhaps the girl's assistant heard nothing for the reason that she was not connected with magic, and only people who possessed it, capable of hearing what she heard only that Yvonne had. The girl did not wait long, and immediately decided to see if her brother was all right, because she was really worried at that moment. It was as if she felt that he really needed help, except that she couldn't even suspect what she might soon see. Surely the lady wasn't prepared for this, even though she assumed something strange was going on. Yvonne opened the door, and immediately sensed that her brother was definitely in danger, so she asked her assistant to call as many people as possible for help. As the girl started to walk into the room, she very distantly heard some words that had to do with magic, and tried to go where they were coming from. The first thing she saw was a slightly open door, and an atmosphere as if something terrible was really happening. But as she approached the room where her brother was, it was as if she saw that it had a slightly pink glow to it, unlike the other rooms. It turned out it was because of the magic her brother had used to try to destroy those creatures, making it seem as if they were even much bigger than they were before. The girl certainly didn't expect to see something like this in her brother's room, and at first she didn't even know what she could do to help him. After he was sure that no one would hear or come to help, Barden was very surprised that his sister had come to him since she was already here. He asked Yvonne to strike with magic. The girl was very surprised and confused, because in this situation she could not use her abilities in magic. So she began to worry about her brother, and think about how to help him, for it would be very hard for him to deal with this creature alone, which was 3 times his size, and there were 2 of them. It turns out that these monsters weren't just scary in appearance. They were actually very dangerous because they could release their poison, which was very dangerous. But for the girl it was no big deal. She had only one goal, to help her brother as much as she could, because no one else would do it. Before Lady Yvonne even realized what was happening, something strange had happened. She found herself in some kind of translucent orb, only it was still unclear if it was her defense or if she was trapped by the monster after all. From the outside, it seemed that they had no chance to escape at all, not to destroy the enemy, who was not going to surrender. Every minute they had less and less confidence that they could defeat them, because it seemed as if they were just trapped and their strength didn't even compare to the one they were going to fight against. But still, they understood perfectly well that they should not count on anyone's help, and at some miraculous moment, no one could save them. They had to rely on their own strength to the last, and be sure that everything will work out. Since there was no one who could help or free them with magic, they had to concentrate and believe in themselves, because they had no other option. Barden, unlike his sister, at least tried a little to use his abilities in magic, but it was still not enough. It was impossible to destroy the enemy with it. Only if Lady Yvonne had helped him with this, and used her powers, perhaps they could have succeeded in destroying one of them with a combined force. But unfortunately, she couldn't do that for some reason. The only thing she came up with at that moment, since there was no way she could help but to stay out of the way, she just moved a little farther away from them. Her brother wasn't even surprised at that, because he had always considered her weak unlike him. But he didn't realize that at this moment, she really couldn't help him at all. So, he has to rely only on himself. The guy at some point has already accepted that his strength is too insufficient to win. But at the same time, he didn't blame his sister much for not trying to do anything, because she really had her reasons for being powerless in the situation. Besides, he assumed that it was probably the girl's first time seeing such a monster, and there was no wonder that at the sight of it, she couldn't react in time and was confused in such a situation. He himself had almost fainted when he first saw it next to him in his room. When he hadn't expected it, he still didn't understand what it was for or where it came from. As he realized that he couldn't do anything without her help, Barden asked his sister to try to do something. But without it, it would be foolish to hope that they would get out of there unharmed. Suddenly, the guy started to feel something strange, and after a while he couldn't move at all. It was as if something froze him. After that, he had a hunch that it was because he was too close to one of the monsters, which could release a poison on him that would make it impossible to move after a while. But since the guy was wearing a protective barrier, it just couldn't happen, although maybe there was a small crack on him that something could get through. The creature saw that the guy was trapped. It approached him and took control of him. Barden realized he was in the most desperate situation, and because of this he was angry at his powerlessness. He began to think about the fact that he couldn't protect her now, since he was now being held by the enemy. He didn't even have a chance to get free somehow, and try to use his powers. As suddenly, he heard his sister's words, and was very much surprised that she dared to defend him when it was almost impossible to do so. When she ordered that monster to let her brother go, it seemed ridiculous to him at first. Did she think anyone would listen to her? But it turns out she somehow found the same bracelet that rolled away some time ago, and before her brother could catch it, she threw it at the creature, and it turns out it did help the behemoth for a while, as if it had been hit hard and wounded considerably. Afterward, the girl told him that he might as well try to get out while he could, for the creature had so far succeeded in distracting him. It turns out that she was able to destroy it with that punch, and a few seconds later, it hit the floor. It turns out that Barden was wrong when he thought it was very foolish to expect any help from his sister, and hoped that she might do something useful. Afterward, when they had already destroyed the enemy, came the people whom the girl had asked to call for help some time ago. On the one hand, they came much later than was necessary, but still it is not known whether their help would have been necessary at that moment, for many of them might have been hurt. It turns out that this creature was created for a reason, but for a specific purpose that has already become apparent, except that the person who needed it couldn't be expected to do something like that. It was the same princess who recently wanted the attention back from the prince. Surely Barden would never have realized it was all because of this man, but it turns out that because her creatures couldn't destroy the enemy, she has to pay for it, because there was some kind of agreement, and if she loses, she has to give something back. The agreement with the monster did not work out, and in return will have to agree to make her life shorter. As suddenly, she became very interested in what was this bracelet, with the help of which, the girl was able to destroy her monster. This became very suspicious to her, and she was able to somehow realize that the girl had managed to do this to the monster that followed her shadow, But that monster that she sent to her brother was of a higher level. He was not the type that could be defeated by normal physical strength. After that, the princess began to remember that the girl somehow heard everything and appeared at the right moment for her brother, although she could not hear anything because of the magic, thanks to which the princess made sure that nothing was heard. It even seemed to her that maybe the girl knew what was going on, even before the princess had planned what. She just couldn't believe it, because it turned out that the girl and the guy were much stronger than she could have imagined. Because of this, she will now have to live a few years less, because her creatures were unable to do what they had agreed to do, as the opponents were much smarter and stronger than she had originally anticipated. She was getting very angry, because as a result, she had not been able to achieve what she wanted. She had lost several years of her life, and even with the help of magic, she had not been able to achieve something. Initially, the princess thought that she should definitely succeed, because she was so confident in her abilities that she didn't even think that someone would be smarter or stronger than her. But still, she can't believe that Yvonne and her brother aren't connected to magic, because they simply couldn't win in this situation if they didn't possess it. After a little time, the princess still decided to check something out, namely, Lady Yvonne. She definitely feels that this girl is hiding something, and she doesn't know something they don't know yet, just like the rest of the people. Meanwhile, the brother and sister decided to go to their father to tell him in great detail what had just happened, and that someone had tried to destroy them with the help of these creatures. That's why it's necessary to find out, so that it doesn't happen again, because this creature could only be created by a person who has the strongest powers, and there are not many such people. But still, for a long time, no one could not understand how this creature could be in their house, because the area is carefully checked, and this could not happen. It turns out that someone from the surrounding has access to knowledge or magic, and was able to create something like this. Barden was very angry that this creature was in his room. Now he can't feel completely safe there, as he knows that at any moment, this creature could show up at any time. And the worst part was imagining that it might be there when he was asleep, or not notice its appearance at all, as it was last time. At that moment, his sister began to think how that creature could have gotten into the house, because on that day, all the windows were closed, and even a small insect could not have gotten in that way. They were left with the assumption that perhaps this creature was originally small in size, and at the right moment simply began to enlarge in order to accomplish its task, to which my father replied that it probably was. But he still didn't think that the person who needed it would have come up with such an obvious and uncomplicated method to accomplish his plan. The man knew for a fact that it was impossible for an ordinary man to create something like this, and still betray enough power to do so. It was obvious to him that the person who did it hated someone very much, and it turns out that this person was his son. Only it's not clear who could dislike him so much. As a result of the conversation, they came to the conclusion that surely this person who had created such creatures and wanted someone to be destroyed was in the palace right now. And also, it was very hard for them to imagine who this man could be, who dared to think up and implement such a thing in the palace, much less who had the audacity to want to destroy Barden. If they found this man, it's hard to imagine what they'd do to him, except that they'd probably never guess that the princess did it, because she doesn't seem like the kind of person who would do something like that, despite the fact that they wanted very badly to know who would want to harm their family. But at the same time, they had no idea who would benefit from doing so. The princess is very lucky that no one can think that she could have done it, because it would seem that such a nice girl has nothing to do with the situation. There was only one method to find out who had organized all this. Ask the Duke his opinion, because he is the owner of the magic tower, and can at least guess who is capable of such a terrible act. But since they had too little useful and, most importantly, verified information with which to approach this person, so you have to start by thinking about who the guy has ever had serious conflicts with. It was very hard for him to remember. The only conflicts he had ever had were a long time ago. And yet, they had not been so strong and serious that it was such a violent revenge many years later. And yet they couldn't think of a single person with whom he'd had misunderstandings or even minor conflicts. So they decided to start by beefing up the guards to make sure the creature didn't get out in the first place. The reason why Barden we incidentally targeted a strong mage could only be one thing, and the girl began to make at least some speculation as to what it might be related to. She wondered if it had something to do with the fact that his sister Yvonne had something to do with magic in the story, though that still wasn't enough to avenge a man in such a way for such a thing. After a little while, their father decided that he would keep the creature in his office for now, so that it wouldn't threaten anyone and everyone would feel safe, unless something else showed up. At some point, the girl even thought that perhaps the real Yvonne had originally created these creatures, and since she and her brother had often had some misunderstandings and conflicts, she might have wanted to take revenge on him in this way. But it sounded too horrible, and the girl wanted nothing to do with it. For if it was true, she was afraid to imagine how her father and brother would react to it. But fortunately she was wrong, because in fact this terrible situation is the work of the very innocent princess, on whom no one would ever think that she could come in this way to take revenge on someone. After that, the girl's father decided to ask her how she had managed to defeat that creature, because it was almost impossible. At least that's what the princess thought. And Yvonne thought for a long time about what to say to her father, so that it would not be suspicious. It was very strange, because she herself knows that she really has nothing to do with this situation, and it was definitely someone else who did it. Only who exactly, unfortunately, no one knows that yet. And yet instead of her decided to give an answer and her brother, he showed the very object with which the girl then destroyed their enemy. It was some thin bracelet, but it is unclear how it could be used to defeat, it would seem, invincible creature. This information surprised her father very much, for it really seems that with the help of this object, it was simply impossible to win, because it did not possess any magic power. But since she's already made up her own mind that she's guilty of something, she's already trying to find an answer so she won't be suspected of anything. As weird as it sounds, this girl does act kind of weird sometimes. After that, her father asked her once again if she had destroyed the enemy with this small bracelet, which could not even create a scratch, let alone destroy the enemy. The girl explained that she had just thrown it, because there was nothing suitable around, to which her father asked why, then she had not used her abilities in magic, because with her help, it would have been much easier and faster to deal with any danger, and especially in that situation. And at that moment, she even thought that maybe she should tell her that she just couldn't use it for some reason. Her brother had wondered why she didn't use it. He would probably be interested to know the reason, and all for one reason. She didn't have the money to buy herself one special stone, and thus regain her power. Yvonne simultaneously hoped that when they found out, they would immediately offer their help. And also, she assumed, she would only be yelled at, or, for example, accused of not being able to even help her brother in such a situation, and was already thinking of how she would justify herself afterwards. But since she is not yet fully confident that she will be properly understood and not accused of anything, it was hard for her to tell the truth, as suddenly, her brother for some reason decided to fix the situation and take everything on himself. The girl did not even expect that she could count on his help at this moment in front of her father. When he said that it was actually his fault, Yvonne was both pleasantly surprised, but at the same time felt very awkward. Barden didn't even let her finish, and began to tell her that when he started to defend himself against that creature, he saw Yvonne at that moment, also trying to help in some way, but genuinely regretting that she couldn't do it, as much as she wanted to. And instead of the girl telling him why she couldn't use her magic, he said she didn't do it only because she could have hurt him in that situation too, so it was better not to do it. So her decision was really the right one, as she was worried about not hurting her brother, and at this point was trying to help in some other way. The guy probably realized that his sister just can't use magic, and he's trying to protect her and justify why she didn't do it, so her father wouldn't guess anything, and it looks like he succeeded. He really helped his sister a lot, even though he knew that if she could, she would have done it for sure. And it looks like she will have to explain to her brother the real reason why she can't use her abilities in magic, because after this, he has the right to be interested in it, and the girl can be sure that this information will be kept secret, so she could trust him, and even count on him to help her if she ever needed it, because she had done it recently, and it was only because of her that they had defeated the creature that Barden would always be grateful to her for that. After the guy helped her in this situation, the girl thought that maybe he also wants to finally get in touch with her, because when they help each other, it is much more pleasant than to be constantly conflicted and not trust each other. As suddenly, the father decided to say that in such situations he definitely reminds him of his wife. She was as brave and beautiful as his daughter is at the moment, and he is very proud of it. This woman was insanely beautiful. Her name was Camille. But unfortunately, for the moment, they can only remember her and be proud that she passed on her beauty, character, courage, and strength to her children. And when they hear that, it makes them happy to think of her and realize that they had all this from birth because of their mother, who at one time was a very strong woman, who could do even more than even the strongest man. She could easily compete with any opponent, and was never afraid of it. For her, there was no word for fear or anything like that. So her father would very much like his children to inherit that from her, and to be as strong in their own right. But after that, they noticed that they had gotten a little off topic, though they would love to continue talking about it. But for now, there was no time for that. The man said that he would try to find out who this man was anyway, who needed to get revenge on one of them. When suddenly Barden said there was something else important he'd almost forgotten to say. Turns out he still wanted to talk about the fact that the Duke Yvonne had been going out with had started asking her out too often lately, and he didn't like it, and the guy didn't want to resolve the issue somehow, because the Duke seems to him to be a suspicious person, who perhaps should not be trusted, because as a result, you may regret it, even if now it seems that nothing bad is happening. Their father was very surprised that the boy had started talking about it, and that he was even interested in the subject. He tried so hard to explain that he needed to reconsider his decision about this questionable man, as it seemed to him, because Duke Yales is too suspiciously nice to everyone. They are very much concerned about him misleading Yvonne and hurting her feelings. Yvonne tried to explain to them that it wasn't true at all, because the people around them had gotten it all wrong. But as usual, no one listened to her. To which her brother replied that if that guy tried to seduce his sister again, she could tell him right away, and he would talk to him. The girl didn't know how she could convince them that everything was normal, and no one should be suspected unless she asked for it herself. When suddenly an assistant came in, and said that a guest had come to see the lady, but as yet no one suspected who it might be. They were most surprised when they heard that this guest had come to the girl's house, for this had never happened before. Her father, of course, began to speculate that it might be the same Yels, but still hoped it wasn't him. The two of them immediately looked at the girl, to see from her reaction whether she was expecting someone or not. But in fact, none of them guessed what kind of guest had come to them. It was a completely different person. And instead of that guy, like everyone originally thought, some girl showed up. But she wasn't empty-handed. She brought some big red box as a gift. This girl was very pretty and looked nice enough, but as yet no one knew for what reason she had come. When Yvonne heard of her arrival, she knew exactly what it was to invite her to tea, and to talk in such a calm and inviting atmosphere. To make this meeting even more pleasant and comfortable, Yvonne asked her assistant to prepare her favorite rose tea for them. This girl sitting in front of her had made a very good impression of herself the first time they met. She was very sweet, like a spring sunshine. Just looking at her makes you feel very calm and comfortable. It seemed to Yvonne that this girl could calm down even the most restless person. Was she really that main character, Cordelia? Yvonne didn't really want to see her, but since it happened, she feels like she's some kind of starlet. At one point, the girl wondered if that was the scene in the story and why she'd come to see her. For a while, there was silence between them. It was very hard for each of them to be the first to start a conversation. So, for a while, they just remained silent. As suddenly, Cordelia started first, and thanked that the girl had agreed to take her in, despite the sudden visit, even though she had thought it likely that Yvonne would deny her the meeting. Afterwards, she said that she already knew, and had long assumed what Yvonne didn't like her very much, for some reason. It was a wonder to the girl whether, for all that she knew about it, she had come anyway. Though she had no dislike for her as she thought, Yvonne was very curious to know what was so important she wanted to say. Plus, Yvonne tried to be nice to her so she would stop worrying in her presence. So she said that for the moment, she had no reason to dislike the princess. Cordelia was very surprised at these words, because she didn't expect to hear such a thing, because she had always thought that they could never be friends and communicate normally. Then, the princess looked very surprised, and asked a rather strange question, namely, whether Yvonne was sure she could succeed in making the prince fall in love with her. After that question, the girl didn't even know what to say, and was a little confused. because she didn't know how to react to it. It turns out that the purpose of the princess's visit today consists of 3 very important points. As expected, she came for a reason. First, she needed to check what Miss Argentros knew about her, as well as how she felt about her, even though Yvonne had tried to convince her that things were good between them. The second item was no less important, to get rid of Barton's bracelet, for if she didn't, she might be in big trouble. Third, she needed to make sure by any means necessary that she could no longer interfere with her plans as she had the last time it had failed. She decided to ask if Yvonne had recently been on a date with the Duke of Yales, which is what everyone was saying, so that the girl would not suspect the princess of anything. She needed a safe cover, such as pretending to be curious about Yvonne and the Duke's relationship. The princess said that when she heard about the news, she thought Yvonne was just trying to forget the prince, and finally acknowledge their relationship with him, despite the fact that because of the prince, the girl used to have a lot of problems and couldn't forgive him. To which Yvonne replied that the princess was quite right. She was no longer trying to get his attention and love like she used to, as she wasn't interested in it now. In order to mislead the girl, and to pretend that she was really interested in the subject, the princess decided to ask her a very strange question, the answer to which did not interest her at all. The princess asked why the girl was purposely catching the prince's eye and making sure he noticed her. The princess already knew that Yvonne had long forgotten the prince, but it was still important for her to talk to her about it, to mislead her into it. And she did. Yvonne was very surprised when she heard the question, for she didn't understand why people were so sure that she was still in love with the prince. To which the princess replied that the girl was on a date in Natsiel, which is far away from the imperial palace, also started these rumors. And as far as she knows, this method is used exclusively and only in high society. Besides, people have a suspicion that she is playing for publicity, and she chose a wealthy and powerful partner to attract the attention of other people. Yvonne didn't even know how to react to that, for she realized that it would be very hard to change the princess's mind about something she was so strongly convinced of, as most people were. After that, Cordelia was not as nice and calm as she had been at first. After a while, she began to accuse the girl of trying to get attention thanks to the Duke, and to get back at the prince. And the naive princess becomes jealous of her lover for this girl, and comes to her rival. It was a great excuse to talk on the subject, and that way no one would suspect the princess of having come for any other reason at all. At that moment, the girl's father came to them, and apparently he was dissatisfied with something, but it was not clear whether it was because the princess had come to the palace, or because she was now talking to his daughter. It turns out he had been standing there for a long time, ever since the girls had walked into that room. It was important to him for some reason to eavesdrop on this conversation, and as it turned out, he had heard something he clearly didn't like, in spite of the fact that his son tried to stop him, because if he started talking to them about it, everyone would realize that they were eavesdropping, to which the father replied that he didn't care at all, because he couldn't stand by and listen to what the princess was saying. Like Yvonne's father and the Duke of Argentros, he could not quietly watch this conversation, and besides, he did not understand why the third prince had not yet sent his answer to which his son replied that there was something he'd forgotten to tell him. Since the third prince is not feeling well, he unfortunately had to refuse to see them. But whether it was really so, no one knew, and since they had already been rejected by him, no one bothered to find out whether he was really unwell, and what the real reason was for his rejection of them. When he first received a letter from the Duke of Yales and the Duke of Argentros, he was very much surprised that these men could write him a letter with any request or suggestion, for such a thing had never happened before. Because he, the third prince, Felix Delk Verbant, had received letters from the most famous and influential dukes in the empire. When his assistant showed him this letter, she thought perhaps he might be interested in reading it and going to see the Dukes of Yales and Argentros. But unfortunately it wasn't. He replied that he was sorry but he couldn't meet, and as it turned out, there was indeed a reason for that. And he refused not only because he just didn't want to go somewhere or see those people. In fact, he had to give up because of his mother, because she had health problems. It was necessary to look after her all the time, and it was impossible to leave her alone. 18 years ago, Empress Giselle lost her 2 children. She had a hard time getting over that moment, and for several years she couldn't forget and come to terms with what had unfortunately happened. She adopted the concubine's son, the fourth Prince Hadrian, and proclaimed him crown prince. The third Prince Felix, son of the concubine Evelyn, is an intelligent and capable man. So why did the empress decide to make a 4-year-old boy the heir? Besides, the fourth prince was born of a woman whose lineage was quite ordinary. After that, a great many aristocrats who had supported the third prince began to express their displeasure, and thought it would be better to persuade the emperor to change such a decision. From the very beginning, a lot of people were against him becoming the heir, so a lot of people disliked him and didn't want him in that status. Because as many people thought, they should have reconsidered this decision, which they think is wrong. One day, Hadrian was talking to the emperor, and the emperor told him that it was all right if he sometimes got cranky and acted like a child, because he could tell something was wrong with him, so he had to go and get some medicine. When the boy came to the man who was to give him this medicine, he said that it was very valuable, so it was not to be told or shown to anyone else. Though he was small, yet in spite of his age, Hadrian understood what this potion was, so he had been thinking about it for days, because it was in a very beautiful jar that he wanted to open. However, he had no other choice, and he still decided to do what the emperor had ordered him to do some time ago. Even though Hadrian was well aware that he had been asked to drink the medicine, even though it was actually poison, in order to make another person succeed him as heir, and despite the fact that he knew it, and initially didn't even want to listen to anyone and take this so-called medicine, he still drank it just so that if it was gone, his mom could live in peace, and she would have a lot less problems that she would have had if he had become the heir as she wanted. As suddenly, it turned out that this jar was not medicine, but ordinary water. Did someone deliberately decide to help him? As suddenly, he heard some loud. After that, it was definitely clear to him that someone was getting sick, and as it turned out, it was unfortunately his mother, Mrs. Evelyn. The boy immediately ran in the direction from where he heard the loud sounds. There were already many helpers there, who were surprised and did not understand what had happened. When he saw that she was lying unconscious on the floor, with the same jar that the emperor had advised him to drink, it made sense to him that someone wanted to get rid of him and his mother. And luckily she was saved, although no one hoped for it, because everyone knew that after this, as they call it, drug, there was very little chance of her surviving. The little boy could not believe that some people were capable of doing such horrible things, especially to his mother, whom he loved very much. But unfortunately, this poison has greatly affected her state of mind, and because of this, she will have health problems for the rest of her life. As a result, when she talked, all her words were very incomprehensible and illogical. She could say some phrase that had nothing to do with the topic of conversation, and unfortunately, she didn't notice it at all. Unlike his son, it was very hard for him to see his mother have serious health problems that unfortunately cannot be cured. After that incident, the boy remembered very often how he used to spend time with his mom when she was fine. It so happened that thanks to his mother, when she drank the very medicine instead of him, he was alive, and to protect her, he must not let this situation happen again. The guy knew for a fact that he was in no way allowed to listen to anyone who seemed suspicious, much less take any medications. Meanwhile, the Duke was in the magic tower, and speculated about why the third prince had not agreed to his proposal. He had suspicions that his excuse about his health was an obvious excuse, because he just didn't want to go somewhere and fulfill someone else's request, except that he didn't know that in fact, he really had reasons to refuse. Then the Duke was sure that the prince was afraid of being seen by the empress, and thought he could protect himself and his world in this way. While he was thinking about it and getting angry with him, the man accidentally bumped into some guy. It was very sudden, because the man didn't even look to see if there were passers-by around him. That guy apologized to Duke for blocking his way, even though it wasn't really the guy's fault at all, just someone needed to look around. After that, he recognized the man, as he was the owner of the tower, and they had not seen each other for a long time, to which the man asked who the guy was, as he thought he had seen him somewhere, to which he replied that his name was Rodnane Yels. It was very strange that the man did not recognize him at once, for he had a memorable appearance, which was almost impossible to forget. And the most surprising part was that the girl's father didn't remember or recognize the guy he had originally recommended for his daughter to go out with him. and also personally asked him to help his daughter to forget one prince, because of whom she could not begin to enjoy life, and to believe that there is still that man who will make her happy. But still, since as of late, he regretted once asking him for help, and his daughter spending time with him. At this point, his opinion of this guy has changed a lot, and all because his son had recently convinced him that Duke Yales could not be trusted, and unfortunately, the girl's father believed it, but for the moment, tried not to show it to him, and asked him what he was doing in that tower. He replied that he had come to see if there was a teacher for a novice like him, to which the man was surprised, and said that Duke Yales was already a master in the business, and he did not understand why he needed a teacher. But the truth is, though, this guy really knows a lot and can do a lot, and the reasons why he needs to get a teacher. After his arrival in the capital, he saw few magical items that simplify life, so he was very impressed by magic. And most importantly, there are such monsters that can be defeated only with her help. Especially, it turns out, you can also learn to heal someone if there are any wounds. Then change will come to the entire Yales clan that guards the Northlands. At this moment, the man's level of wariness was slightly diminishing, for he was very much surprised that he knew such a wise young man, with good thoughts and intentions, which was very good. Afterwards, the guy said that once the man helped them a lot, and so he always treated him with respect and gratitude, to which the man replied that in his place, everyone would do so. And also, he is very pleased that the guy still remembers about it, and does not forget after so many years. After this, Duke Yales decided not to dwell on it, and remembered Yvonne. As this girl had made a good impression, he could not fail to mention her. The guy said that the man raised a beautiful daughter, with whom he was very interesting and enjoyable to spend his free time. After all these compliments, the girl's father began to trust this guy more and more, and thought that in addition to a well-trained body and a pleasant character, he was also a good judge of character. So the man concluded that maybe this guy was better than he thought he was. As a result of this conversation, the man concluded that he was probably wrong in believing his son, and was sure that this fellow could not be trusted. After this, Yelles decided to talk on one subject, which concerns that prince, because he does not understand how this man could do such a thing to the girl who loved him very much. But unfortunately, it was not mutual. Yvonne's father was in agreement with him, and asked him if he also, as he did, thought that this prince had done very unkindly to his daughter. Besides, he had a great deal to say about him, like the fact that everyone loves this prince so much for one reason, because once upon a time he was a hero, but after a while he became arrogant because of it, and he has a lot of problems now. The man told the guy that the prince, due to his status, thinks that he should have a girl like that around him who will match that, and for that reason, he constantly turned Yvonne down. When he told him about it, he felt much better, because he had never discussed it with anyone before, and when they listened to him, he felt really good, because there was someone who had the same opinion as him. Afterwards, in honor of such a good conversation in this meeting, the man proposed to the Duke to continue this conversation at his palace during dinner, to which the lad of course agreed, and promised to come to the... Then they said their goodbyes, and each of them went about their business. Now the girl's father is sure that this guy can be trusted, because next to him, Yvonne can really be happy. Meanwhile, Yvonne and the princess continued to talk and drink tea, and at one point, the princess noticed that something was wrong. She was anxious to get an honest answer, for she did not understand why the girl was reacting so calmly to her unusual questions, to which the princess expected there would be very emotional reactions, but apparently she was wrong. But still, she didn't want to give up, and she thought that if this was the right Yvonne Argentros, she should have been angry by now and kicked the princess out of the palace. But it was the same as last time. Her plan failed just like when she wanted to hurt Yvonne's brother. Suddenly, Yvonne must have gotten tired of talking about obscure topics and answering strange questions. So she asked the princess if that was all she wanted to talk to her about. But the princess hadn't expected it, and didn't think the girl wouldn't want to waste her time talking about something that wouldn't be interesting to her. Yvonne explained that she was just curious if the princess had come at such a time, not to discuss anything serious, but just to talk about the prince and drink tea. The princess did not expect the girl to waste her time on this talk this time, and tell her what she really thought, for in the meantime, she could have been resting or doing something that would be more useful, And at that moment, the princess realizes that maybe Yvonne is a lot smarter and more dangerous than she originally thought. So she decides to get rid of her. But since she had to answer something, the princess said that the girl could say anything she wanted and that she had no intentions whatsoever. But no one would believe her. After all, everyone knows and understands that Yvonne couldn't fall in love with the prince so quickly, because she is the villain who is ready to do anything to make him fall in love with her. In addition, in high society, there are already rumors that Yvonne walked with the Duke only in order to draw attention to her and tell the prince that she is no longer interested in him, although in fact, the princess is sure that the girl is still in love with him. After that, for some reason, the princess decided to say that both she and the prince and the Duke were suffering because of it. And after that, she asked why this was happening. But that wasn't all. The princess wasn't so nice anymore, and asked to answer directly if Yvonne wasn't the kind of person who liked a ruined reputation. So the girl wanted to put oil on the fire to make Yvonne angry, after which, according to the plan, she should destroy herself. She's always doing that, destroying things that get in her way, and this time, she decided to burn it down and break it so it would go away. It was necessary for her to make of Yvonne the person whom in time no one would trust, namely, to make it so that everyone would believe that the girl had twice tried to destroy the princess and the future consort of the crown prince. It was exactly the result she had come for, apparently this time, but set up much more determined than last time. But apparently that wasn't enough, and once again her plan failed. Yvonne was much smarter than that, and didn't fall for the princess's scheme. Cordelia had a high opinion of herself, and thought that she would be able to piss anyone off so easily. But it was just her expectations that had nothing to do with reality. At that moment, Yvonne could not understand only one thing: why everyone around her thought that she still had feelings for the prince. After all, it had been a long time, and the girl realized that it was her big mistake. Yet she answered that she was sorry that such rumors were circulating, but about her feelings for the prince, which were no longer there, she told the truth. When the princess had originally planned to come to the palace and talk about the subject, she could not have expected Yvonne to react and answer all her questions so calmly. The only person who didn't know what to say in this situation wasn't Yvonne. It was the princesses who had so much confidence in herself. After that, Yvonne said that the girl could no longer worry about it, because she had long forgotten the principal, and most importantly, he had such a lovely bride, and he had long since paid no attention to other girls. And if there are any problems, she'd better discuss this topic personally with the prince, because no one but them will be able to help in this situation. And in order to somehow end this conversation, and to make it clear that the girl no longer wanted to talk about this topic, she advised not to involve strangers who had nothing to do with her personal affairs. The princess didn't expect such an answer, and didn't even know what to say to it, or to justify the fact that for the sake of this conversation, she had come at such a time as this. And at that moment, the girl's brother, who had heard what they were talking about all this time, suddenly walked in. He said that he was passing by and happened to hear their conversation, and then that if the princess continued to insult his sister, he wouldn't stand for it anymore. To which the princess thought that he always talked to her as if she didn't exist, and now he's acting like a caring brother, which is very strange, and not like him. But since she was out of options, she had to back off and come up with another plan to hurt Yvonne. So, she decided to apologize for her behavior because she couldn't control her emotions, and she let things get to her, although she admitted it was just an excuse. And apparently after that, she decided to use the second plan after all, and directed their attention to the gift from the prince she came with. Yvonne said she noticed it initially and was very curious to see what was inside, because judging by the box, it must be something big and beautiful. To which the princess replied that it was a gift that the prince had given her through the maid, to which the girl's brother asked what that had to do with the present situation. After this question, the princess cried at once, and said that the present was not meant for her, and that they could understand it for themselves when they read the note inside, which said that it was a present for Lady Yvonne. Everyone was very curious to find out what was inside the box after all, especially if it was meant for Yvonne. The princess said she would no longer excuse her behavior, but wanted them to know that she did not have any ill intentions towards them. So, apologized. And then, something happened that they certainly couldn't have expected, for it was obvious that the princess had just given up and walked away. Although it wasn't like her to do that, she had so many plans, and most importantly, to piss Yvonne off. But since that didn't work, there was no point in staying and talking about anything. But since the princess didn't know one very important thing, the girl was no longer the villain that the real Yvonne was, and she couldn't be so easily angered. Also, her brother is still wondering how his sister can be so calm after that conversation when the princess didn't even hide the fact that she wants to make her angry. But he doesn't know something else interesting. The whole time he and her father were hiding behind the door and overhearing this whole conversation, Yvonne knew about it right away. And when Barden asked her why she looked so calm, the girl knew exactly what to say to him. Namely, that it was all due to him. He, on the other hand, did not find himself standing outside the door, so she was afraid if she did anything wrong, he would surely faint, to which he asked how she knew it, and how she had realized it. To which she replied that she just always had good hearing. So, this time, she would forgive him for eavesdropping. But just for today, next time, she wouldn't be so kind. And really, they weren't just words. Yvonne was actually glad that Barden was there for her, and she could say anything she wanted because she knew he would take action if anything happened. After that, the girl realized that even she was angry. And how would the real Yvonne, who was the real villain, feel in this situation? It was obvious that with just one conversation, this meeting would not end. And at best, it would take a very long time for the wounds to heal completely. After they had talked, the guy asked not to open that box, and in the near future, he would throw it away on his own down the road. To which the girl replied that she didn't have to do that, and she'd handle the gift herself. But Barden still asked her to throw the box out herself, and then he'd check it out later. After her brother left, the girl began to wonder what could have made Cordelia so angry and leave without saying goodbye. Meanwhile, the princess is already on her way home in her carriage after an unfortunate conversation. She was very upset because once again, for some reason unknown to her, she was failing. At one point, she summoned her assistant with magic, whose name is Pember. When he started to appear, at this place, some blue smoke appeared. It looked very beautiful, and after a few seconds he did appear, and asked what reason his mistress had summoned him, to which she asked what was the matter with the bracelet. The assistant said he had managed to find it after all, and offered to destroy it right away if necessary, to which the girl replied that if the bracelets disappeared right after her visit, someone might suspect her. So it's best to watch and then destroy it when the moment is right, since the bracelet's clear, leaving Miss Argentros. She had heard that the girl had changed a lot, but thought it was all subterfuge. Even those around her were talking about how she hadn't left the house in days, and was cautious in her actions. She's a dangerous person who almost got Cordelia killed, so you have to stay on your guard and keep watching her, because people change so quickly. But the lady she met today was nothing like the villainous Yvonne, and what was most surprising was that she was not at all interested in the gift the prince had supposedly given her. After these observations, she got suspicious that she might actually be using the sun's source of sunshine. It was a mood booster for some aristocrats. It was added to the water during bath time to make the skin more radiant. But if you apply it constantly, it can conversely cause an unpleasant-looking skin disease. And the princess was the only one who knew how to cure her, meaning she was the only one who could be their savior. And when they started praising her for that rescue, she would tame the lady in the same manner. But it turned out that it wasn't as easy as she had originally thought. So the princess knew for sure that she needed to think much better and more carefully next time. And luckily, since her assistant saw how difficult it was for his mistress to carry out her plan, he could help her with a few things. Before he left the room, he saw something. It turns out that in some moments, he can be completely invisible. But what was so interesting, he could see that the princess couldn't see. It turns out he noticed that Yvonne was emanating magic that ordinary people would never see. This girl certainly did not expect to hear from her assistant, because this information could really be very useful. At that moment, the girl asked herself how she could not have realized it before, because it was obvious that if Yvonne had magic, it makes sense how she could have known about the monster and gotten there in time for her brother to need help. And also, it is now obvious how she heard sounds that ordinary people could not hear because of the barrier the princess had created to ensure that what was happening in that room could not be heard by anyone else. Cordelia had no way of expecting that Yvonne might have some ability in magic that she didn't know about. After that, The princess asked the aide to go back and accomplish the deed without anyone noticing it. At that moment, the princess thought she had found a way out. All she had to do was accuse Ivan of using magic, and the imperial palace would do the rest. Her mood had improved considerably as she had a new plan. Thanks to the helpful information from the assistant, all that was left to do was to get the evidence. And thus she will soon be able to marry a prince, even if she has to get rid of those who would prevent it. Meanwhile, the Duke of Yales has already prepared a beautiful and large bouquet, and is going to dinner at Argentro's palace. But there was one very important point that confused him. Instead of setting off closer to the evening, the Duke for some reason decided to do so much earlier, despite the fact that he had been invited to dinner rather than lunch. But still he hoped that no one would object to it, and he wouldn't get kicked out. Apparently he had nothing left to do. Could it be that the only reason he had come so early was to see Lady Yvonne as soon as possible? He wanted to see her so badly that he had arrived a few hours early, and he also hoped very much that she would be present at this dinner, and they could socialize. When suddenly, the girl very quickly opens the window from her room. Only at that moment, she did not look kind at all, rather the contrary. But the Duke had not yet realized that he had better get away from the place, or he might suffer. When suddenly, the girl suddenly threw an object out of the window, and she did it quite violently. He barely had time to notice it, but unfortunately, he didn't have time to react, because the object was too small, and while it was flying down, it was hard to see it. It seemed to him that everything had happened literally in a second, but the lack of understanding of what was happening made it hard for him to know how to react to it. After this object that the girl threw out of her window landed, there was a lot of fire and a loud sound. It turned out that 15 minutes ago, the girl had read the letter that was in the gift, and indeed, it was meant for her. It said that the prince was very sorry that the girl did not come to the tea party, so he decided to make a gift for her. It was the very same product that is meant to improve the skin. Now the girl understood why the princess didn't like it, because even though the prince has a girlfriend, he makes gifts for someone else. The gift looked nice, but she decided it would be better to throw it away and not use it, because there was no telling what might be inside it. At this point, an assistant came to her and asked permission to enter, to which the girl replied that she was not busy at the moment, so she was allowed to enter. Afterward, the assistant told me that they had just gotten word from Ferretro that they might get into making cosmetics, as they had recently wanted to. This was just great news. Now it was just a matter of deciding what kind of products they would produce, to which the assistant asked if there were any ideas. The girl hadn't thought about it yet, but when she looked at the gift from the prince, she concluded that bath products are now very popular among aristocrats. This is a perfect example of a product that will be used in summer. And if someone buys that product from them, and that girl is socializing with someone, her friends might notice the nice scent, and will definitely ask where she bought it, because they'll want one just like it. After these reflections, Yvonne has definitely made a decision that she will make and sell. Which merchandise that will definitely go in to buy a lot of girls. To which the assistant replied that this was a very good idea, and then asked if she was holding a sun source. Yvonne was very surprised that this was the name of the remedy, and it turns out a lot of people know about it. Because it is the same product that makes skin look like silk, it has become so popular that it is not easy to buy even for a lot of money. Yvonne immediately wondered what it meant, and how much money could buy this remedy for she had never been interested in this before. To which the assistant replied that for one jar, you have to pay 10 million gold pieces, and this is not the highest price for which they sell this product. Yvonne of course assumed that this jar was very expensive, but she could not even suspect that it was such a huge sum for just one jar, which would not even be enough for a few months. When the girl found out the value, she got very excited. Because she had just almost thrown away 10 million, Yvonne decided to keep the gift, in order to sell a little later and get the money. Afterward, her assistant asked if this was the same gift from the prince she had recently received. But the girl was a little disgusted by the question when she heard it, and the prince she'd been trying to forget for so long. And despite the fact that everyone is well aware of it, some people still bring it up as if they're doing it on purpose. When suddenly, while they were talking, Yvonne noticed something suspicious quite by accident, which alarmed her very much. It was as if the girl felt that they were in danger, and something bad might happen now that might harm them. Yvonne somehow miraculously saw that the assistant had earrings, and one of them was glowing red for some reason. Something surely, she thought, meant danger. And what was most amazing was that with each passing minute, one Sergei began to glow brighter and brighter, as if something was going to happen very soon. Just a few minutes ago, it might not have been noticeable, but now, it's glowing so brightly that even the assistant noticed it. And as soon as Yvonne noticed that unpleasant sheen of earrings, she somehow saw fit to take her away and keep herself and the assistant safe. The girl herself didn't notice how something made her do it, as if an unknown force was trying her hands to help the situation somehow. At this moment, everything was happening very fast. The assistant did not fully understand why her mistress needed to take that earring from her. But in fact, the girl knew from somewhere that she was acting correctly in this situation. But because of the sense of danger, she didn't have time to explain anything, and did everything very quickly. Yvonne felt for some reason that they had very little time left, and if she did everything as quickly as possible, it would be better. But where she got these thoughts from, she didn't understand. But she knew she had to listen to that feeling, because in her opinion, in this situation, it was better to be reassured than to be afraid of something unknown that could happen at any second, when they wouldn't even expect it. And as it turned out, the feeling of something strange and dangerous, it wasn't a mistake. And if the girl hadn't reacted to it in time, there could have been very bad consequences. And at that moment, Yvonne didn't know that there was some person in the garden who might be hurt if anything happened. And when she saw that there was a duke standing in the place where she threw that object, she wished she could turn back the clock and not do it. When she realized that she was very wrong, and at that moment needed to at least make sure that there really wasn't anyone there. It turns out he wasn't worried about arriving too early for nothing. It's like he knew it was a mistake, and he shouldn't have arrived so early, at least for his own safety. But unfortunately the deed was already done. Even though the girl managed to throw away that earring, the flames reached her room. It's hard to imagine what would have happened if she hadn't done that. After the fire was gone, the girl began to think about the fact that she might have just gotten a person hurt because of her. And after a while, she began to realize that she had just seen Rodnan. Yvonne began to hope that he was all right, and had managed to escape from that place after all. When she ran to the window, hoping to see him standing somewhere nearby unharmed. Though after that, there was very little chance that everything was all right. As suddenly, she saw something she definitely didn't expect to see. She thought it was likely he would be unconscious and would need someone's help. Through the smoke, it was visible that he was standing there somewhere. It turns out that even in this situation, he had acted like a true duke, and if not for him, the consequences would have been much worse. It turned out, which was not surprising, that he reacted very quickly, and when the falling Soroshka approached him, he decided to neutralize her before she fell to the floor. And it was very right, because if she did fall, there would be nothing left of the palace. When the girl saw him standing there looking at her, she was very happy, but still felt guilty that because of her, if he didn't react in time, there would be terrible consequences. Perhaps the fact that he arrived much earlier, even though he didn't realize it, was his destiny to save and somehow influence this situation. Because if it wasn't for him, many people could have died. When Yvonne looked him in the eye, she felt ashamed, because it was wrong of her to throw that thing away and not make sure that no one would get hurt. After that, the girl began to worry a lot, because she didn't know what to say to him. She thought that he might get the impression that she had done it on purpose to get back at him in some way, though he probably definitely wouldn't think so, because things aren't so bad between them that she would do that to him, and he knows it. After a while, when they had calmed down, Yvonne asked her assistant if she was hurt, to which the girl replied that she was fine, and thanks to Yvonne, she was unharmed. When the girl saw that her assistant was a little scared, she suggested that she go to her room and rest, to which the assistant replied that she was fine. She would call someone, and they would try to clean up quickly. Yvonne thanked her for her help, and said that she needed to step away for a while, for it seemed that Duke Yels needed help, as he was in the place where the girl had placed the earring. When the assistant found out about it, she started to blame herself, because she had almost hurt a person, to which Yvonne replied that it wasn't her fault, and she didn't have to worry about it. After the girl left the room, she wanted to explain to Rodnan as soon as possible that she hadn't done it on purpose and hadn't meant to hurt him. Since she didn't have time to think about anything for long, She realized it would be best to figure out what to say to him while, and how she would run to his aid. Although it wasn't as easy as it might seem at first glance, the girl was afraid that after something like this, their relationship might be ruined, and he would never forgive her. After that incident, she couldn't understand how she could have done that. At this moment, it's very important for her to come up with a clear plan how to explain this situation to him, because probably, as she thinks, he won't even want to talk to her. As she descended the stairs, completely forgetting that many people would want to watch what was happening, for it was a sound that every resident of the palace had heard, and everyone was curious to know what had happened, as Yvonne suddenly wondered, why did Sergei start glowing at that exact moment? Was there a danger somewhere nearby that the system had reacted to? When most people went outside and there wasn't so much smoke, it was much more convenient to see what was going on around them and what the aftermath was, after the situation was over. When the girl was coming out, she asked people to move to the side so she could pass and help the person if needed. And people were very much surprised by it, for before, the villainess had never taken any interest in the affairs of the family, and even when it was necessary, she had never helped anybody. Yvonne was sure everything around her would be pretty much destroyed, but surprisingly, everything looks intact. It's very strange that after something like that, there was almost no devastation, and much was left as it had been before. Looking all around, if one didn't know what had happened, it was hard to imagine that such a situation had occurred. It turns out it's really all thanks to the Duke, because he was there when it all happened. He absorbed the destructive wave, and because of that, everything around him survived. After a little time, the people around decided that they needed to find the villain who had caused this situation, because such a thing cannot be forgiven, and most of them wanted to take revenge on this person who wanted to harm the palace and the people who live here. But unfortunately, none of them realized that it wasn't to destroy everything around them, but to keep themselves and the assistant safe for a while back. When Yvonne saw the guy, she felt a lot calmer because she made sure he was definitely okay. But she was still thinking about when to apologize to him because with so many people around, she felt uncomfortable. And when he noticed her, he looked at her as if nothing had happened. On the contrary, he was very happy to see her. Since the girl hadn't thought of what to say to him yet, she was very embarrassed, because he might think that she wasn't going to apologize, or even worse, that she did it on purpose. But in order to explain everything to him, you need to choose a moment when there are as few people around as possible who can hear that it was because of her. But fortunately, he looked as if he had long since forgiven her, and did not think that she thus meant to hurt him, and that she might have done it on purpose. There were a lot of people looking at them as they stood together, and talking about how they looked at each other, and that most likely they were in love with each other. When the time came to say something to him, Yvonne was afraid even to look him in the eye, for she did not know how he would react, and yet she made up her mind, and asked him if he was hurt. That the guy replied that everything is fine, but in fact, he did not expect that today such a situation could happen. Originally, Here was going to give a bouquet, but unfortunately, because of this situation, he is a little spoiled and does not look as beautiful as he was. Yvonne hadn't expected that he wanted to give her a bouquet of flowers. It was very nice and unexpected, especially after he might have been very badly hurt a while ago. But thankfully he was fine. When she realized that this bouquet could only mean that it was just a show of politeness, she was once again convinced that the Duke was a very good man, and even in such a situation, he was very calm and polite. She was very sorry that this meeting had happened in this way, and this gorgeous bouquet now did not look as beautiful as it had a few hours ago, and all because unfortunately, an unforeseen situation had occurred. When the guy saw that the girl was very upset, he suggested that he should go for a new bouquet. It will help to improve her mood, and she will no longer think about something bad and feel guilty. Yvonne was delighted with the way he was acting in this situation. After a while, the girl did ask what the occasion was for which he had come to Argentros Manor, to which he replied that he had been invited to dinner by her father, and since it was daytime outside and there was plenty of time before evening, Yvonne wondered why he had arrived so early, to which he replied that he had business nearby, and when he was free he decided to come by a little earlier, much earlier. But still she wondered why her father needed to invite the Duke to dinner. As she thought about it, the head of the guards came up to her, A afterwards apologized for interrupting their conversation, but explained that it was necessary to do so. It turns out he was here about a situation that could hurt the palace and a lot of people. He needed to ask her if she knew any information that could help find the person that caused this to happen. I wondered if she was going to tell the truth, or if she was going to try to make something up. Because according to that man, there are no other witnesses besides Duke Yales, who happened to be on the scene. But the Duke says he doesn't know anything, and no evidence has been found either, meaning he won't tell anyone who was involved. It was very surprising to her, for the girl was sure that soon everyone would know that she was the one who had done it. Yvonne said why he said he knew nothing. In response, he just looked at her and let her know he wasn't going to set her up, so she could rest easy, and if she wanted to, she could confess to everything. It was very strange when she asked a second time why he didn't say anything when that man was standing nearby. But the Duke continued to remain silent without giving anyone away. But at one point, he told her that it looked like she had no idea who it might be either. And after that, he said that if he found out anything, he would make sure to help look into the situation, and they would find the person together. But in the meantime, he advised to check on other people to draw suspicion away from Yvonne. After the man had gone, the Duke asked the girl to bring him into the drawing room, for he did not want to be out in the street when there were many people looking at him, to which the girl agreed, and said that she would be glad to take him in. And at that moment, she was afraid of him for some reason, because she thought he might want to make a deal with her and ask for damages, or he will start demanding to do whatever he asks, because the girl was guilty in front of him, and to apologize, she will have to do something. But still, he didn't seem like the sort of man who would do that to her, for he was a polite and good man, to whom she was very grateful that he didn't accuse her in front of other people. But still, because of the guilt, she was very uncomfortable, and at the same time frightened when they were alone together. Though it was very strange on her part, for there was not a single situation in which he had acted like that, or wanted to harm her. And when they got there, they couldn't find a topic to talk about for a long time, because after the guy helped her, she felt guilty and didn't know what to say to him. But fortunately, as was usual, Rodnan started the first conversation, and asked if this was really his private parlor, to which she replied that it was, for she thought the parlor on the first floor was too noisy, and they would not feel comfortable talking. All the more so, it would be better to negotiate in secret, when no one would see or hear them. Then, the guy turned his attention to the broken glass, and realized that it looked like the shockwave was too strong, to which the girl replied that it was just like that, and in that situation, she didn't even know how to react to it, because everything happened too fast. And despite that, the guy couldn't understand why after that situation, no matter how strong Yvonne was, her hair and clothes didn't get damaged. But still, he was very glad she was okay, to which she replied that she was just as glad he wasn't hurt, and afterwards, of course, thanked him, and apologized that he was in that situation because of her. But for some reason, he was very surprised why she was apologizing for something. But Yvonne asked why he was so surprised, because thanks to him, no one knew that this whole situation was because of her. So, she was very grateful to him for that. But afterwards, even though the girl had just thanked the guy, she said that she shouldn't have protected her and done everything possible to keep her from being declassified, because it was a mistake. To which he asked why it was a mistake. In the evening he tried to do the best, and it turned out that it was for nothing, and the girl did not appreciate it, which was very unpleasant for him, because he tried for her sake. And when the girl told him the reason why she had thrown that object out of the window, he didn't expect that it was really like that. And then, he decided to inquire about it, why she didn't use protection magic in this situation, because it was the best option, which would have resulted in no one getting hurt, if she had decided to tell him, even though she'd been afraid to for a long time. And even at that moment, she doubted very much whether she was doing the right thing, and whether it was necessary to tell this man what she had been hiding for a long time, for she did not trust him enough to tell him yet. She was also thinking about how to give him the right information, because if she said the wrong thing, she could get into a lot of trouble. But still, she thought about telling him the truth, because maybe he could give her some advice. As suddenly, he asked her the very question she feared most, and if she had known he might ask it, she would never have started this conversation in the first place. The Duke asked as he began to suspect that she might have thrown the object at him on purpose, to harm him, or to get revenge for something else. After these words, the girl definitely realized that he was beginning to suspect her of something, although she thought that it was simply impossible, because she had never done that to him. And in fact, she had never tried to sit him up to us. Yvonne thought that she should tell him about her illness, and maybe he would understand and she could convince him that she didn't want to hurt him in any way. But the problem was that word would get out about it, and then everyone who was against her would try to hurt her, and there would be so many people that she wouldn't be able to deal with them. So, she had to make a very important decision and answer the most important question: whether she could cope with them, and what could be done to prevent all these problems that could happen. Because to do that, she would have to make a very important choice that would determine a lot of things. But in the event that she doesn't say anything back to him, she'll be a real villain in the eyes of many people who tried to do harm with magic again. It's not the first time, is it? And if that happens, you can count on no support and trust from your father, brother, and the other people who used to trust her. Therefore, she realized that it was necessary to choose the most correct option, thanks to which she would not have any difficulties and troubles, because if she ceased to trust, it would be very difficult, and most likely, just impossible to correct it. The moment had come when she had to decide what she would say to him, and as she had one single chance and try, she knew that she must take it as seriously as possible. And when some time had passed, Yvonne still tried to say something to him, but at that moment, she didn't even expect him not to listen to her, and say that it meant he was right. After that, Yvonne began to think about how she would have to deal with the consequences that would soon follow, because if even Rodnan didn't believe her, then the rest of them weren't going to know whether she was telling the truth or not. But for some reason, in that moment, he looked completely different from someone who didn't trust her. And afterward, he assumed and said that maybe she was trying to test him, and asked if that was really the case. But the girl did not quite understand what these words could mean, for she did not know what to say to him, or what he meant by them. The thing is, when he realized he had more than just an interest in Yvonne, he wanted to be the most important fish in his tank. However, he had spent most of his life in the Duchy of Yells, and knew nothing of her. He had the desire to fix it, to take it to the next level, and their relationship began to evolve. So he began to look for any information about Lady Argentros, for it was not only interesting to him, but very necessary to him. The more he got to know her, the more he wanted her to be his girlfriend. But still, to begin with, he had to find out why, a few years ago, the girl had been so much in love with Prince Adrian, and if she gave him a chance, he could prove that she would be much happier beside him than with any other man. And then, when he is completely sure that the girl loves him sincerely, he will be able to protect her from any man who would want to harm her. It would be no problem for him to make the people who had once made her cry or be sad responsible for it. It turned out that he had liked Yvonne from the very beginning, and despite an unsuccessful first date, his impression of her was not spoiled, but on the contrary, he constantly wanted to meet her and be near her. When he saw the light from the fire at that moment, he felt confusion, and at the same time, strange as it may sound, joyousness. It was as if he saw him as his opponent, whom he wanted to defeat by any means, even if it took a lot of time and effort. It did not matter to him, because the priority was to surprise the girl, and to let her know that for her sake, he could do a lot of things. Even despite how dangerous, risky, unexpected, or unpleasant it would be, at that moment, there was definitely nothing that could stop him, because he was determined to do it, even if it seemed impossible from the outside. So, he assumed that the girl had thrown that object at him then, to test what he was capable of, and whether he had the strength and skills to cope even in this difficult situation. So, he told her that since he had managed to cope with these trials, which were not really any trials, but it was still important to him that the girl saw in him strength, courage, and willingness to act even in the most difficult and unexpected situations, thanks to which she could have confidence that he was able to protect her. To which the girl replied that it seems, unfortunately, he misunderstood everything. So she offered him to discuss everything normally, so that each of them would understand what was going on and what the real reason was that all this had happened. The girl asked her assistant to prepare tasty drinks and snacks for them, so that this conversation could take place in a more comfortable environment, which would not hurt after what had happened. The girl was surprised that he thought that she might be checking him out, although the guy was acting too calm and surprisingly not nervous at all. So she decided to ask him why he thought that, because it wasn't really the case. To which he replied that he didn't even doubt it, and couldn't believe that he could be wrong. For from his observations, he was really sure that Lady Yvonne wanted to test his abilities. Besides, if you analyze the situation that happened, it is impossible to believe that it was not a test, and the reason could be some other reason. But since he doesn't know the real reasons, and is absolutely sure that he got it right, the girl wondered if there was any need at the moment to tell him the way it really was, or on the contrary, to do it a little later so as not to spoil anything. But when Yvonne remembered what he had said, namely that she could test his abilities, she wondered what he meant. For could the Duke think that she was in love with him, and for that, wanted to see if he was really worthy of being her future husband? But she couldn't understand one thing. How could he think that when she had already explained to him that she didn't know that he was on the palace grounds at that moment? So it was very strange of him to think that it was done on purpose. As suddenly, Yvonne thought about the fact that maybe Rodney knew a lot more about her than she'd realized, and that maybe she knows who he really is. But still, his calm attitude suggests that she can't escape her responsibility or hide from him, no matter what she does or how hard she tries to hide it. So I'm going to have to choose between telling him about the magical memory loss, or giving up my own safety, or continuing to be a danger to him. So she told him that he'd said before that he wasn't accusing her of anything, to which he replied that he was. After that, the girl said that she wanted to ask him to forgive her, and that in fact, she was really testing him, and it turned out that he was a very noble man. Apparently she decided not to tell him the truth, and to pretend as if he understood everything correctly. After that, she decided to ask him for something, namely, not to tell anything about this situation and this test to that person. If he didn't tell anyone anything, no one would even know about her illness. It seemed to her that this would be the best option, so that she would not have to tell anyone about her secret, and the Duke would be sure that she did not want to hurt him, but just wanted to make sure that he was the real Duke. And after that, he wondered what the girl meant, because he did not immediately realize who it was about, and who it was, that man. To which the girl replied that she meant the prince. As suddenly, after her answer, it was noticeable that the guy didn't like the fact that the girl started talking about the prince in his presence. But she didn't really want to do it, and she didn't think he might not like it, and that he might stop talking. He said that he couldn't understand why she was talking about the prince, because in this situation, the girl doesn't know that he likes her very much, so he was uncomfortable that she was talking about another guy in his presence. Though it was not surprising, he didn't like it. Reporting everything to the prince was his duty. Not only did she give him a checkup, she also asked him not to tell anyone, though it was his duty to do so. Afterwards, she apologized and said she just wasn't thinking and said the wrong thing, to which he answered her, about what had happened today. He would do his best to make the girl feel at ease, and not to think that she might have any problems. Then, it was evident that he still had something to say to her, and for that he sat a little closer, and apparently to say something important, namely, that he would try to fulfill her request, and that not only the prince but no one else would know that she had asked him to do so she could have no doubt about it, and confide in him. After that, he made her understand that if she asked him for anything, he would never refuse her anything, and would try to make her feel at ease and not worry about anything. And of course she could trust him. But it turns out that the Duke's floor was a little surprise for her, which she will surely be very happy, because it symbolizes what he thinks he has managed to show her how strong and courageous he is, and that he can do absolutely anything. And afterwards, he told her that it was very important to him that the girl felt safe around him, and that she felt she could trust him. When the girl saw the very earring which she had recently thrown out of the window, she did not expect to see it at all, and did not understand how he had managed to keep it and find it where it was, for it was so small that it must have been very difficult to see it. As Yvonne suddenly began to wonder if he was willing to do this, even if it would be bad for his duties, and possibly cause problems in the future. It was amazing to her that he was willing to do this just so that she could trust him. After that, he said it was just about the two of them, and why would anyone else want to know about it if it could be kept secret, and not cause unnecessary problems that no one needed. To which the girl wondered if he felt that way, and this situation was relevant to his investigation. So, she told him that since he says that, she's very grateful for it, because she didn't expect him to be so kind. And maybe he's the only one who truly believes that Yvonne can change for the better and stop being a villain. He's really very caring. To which he replied that he was very glad they had talked about it, for as a result, he thought things were much clearer. So the only thing left to do was to deal with the chief of the guard, which is what he meant by influencing this investigation to end quickly.